This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told anyone about this outside my immediate family because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I've lived in Pinewood my entire life. It's one of those small towns where everyone knows each other and nothing exciting ever happens. At least that's what most people think. For me, though, this place has always felt different. Ever since I was little, I've seen things others don't. My parents initially dismissed it as an overactive imagination. When I was 3, I would talk about the nice lady who would sit at the foot of my bed. My mom would humor me, thinking I had an imaginary friend. By the time I was 7, I stopped mentioning these things because I could tell it made my parents uncomfortable. But yesterday, something happened that I can't explain away, and it's got me completely freaked out. It started around 2 in the afternoon. I was in my bedroom doing homework when I heard my dad call my name from downstairs. "Lisa, can you come help me with something?" It sounded exactly like him, that slightly gruff tone he gets when he's been working too long on a project. I yelled back, "Coming," and headed for the stairs. When I got to the bottom, I saw my dad sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over his laptop with his reading glasses on, completely absorbed in whatever he was doing. The thing is, when I asked what he needed help with, he looked at me like I was crazy. "I didn't call you," he said, frowning. I felt a chill run up my spine. The voice had sounded exactly like him, not similar, identical. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the TV. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. A few hours later, around 5, I was back in my room trying to focus on my biology notes, but I couldn't shake that weird feeling. Our puppy, Max, a little brown terrier we'd adopted 3 months ago, suddenly appeared in my doorway. He's not supposed to be upstairs because he's still being house-trained, so I got annoyed. "Max, you know you're not allowed up here," I scolded, getting up to shoo him back downstairs. That's when my mom called from the living room. "Lisa, who are you talking to?" I poked my head out of my room to answer her. Max snuck upstairs again. "No, he didn't," she replied. "He's been curled up on my lap for the past hour." My blood ran cold. I slowly turned back to my doorway, but there was nothing there. Whatever I'd seen, it wasn't Max. It looked exactly like him. The same scruffy fur, the same cocked head, even that little white patch on his ear. But it wasn't him. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was stress from midterms. Maybe I needed to eat something. I went downstairs, trying to act normal, and made myself a sandwich. Max was indeed on my mom's lap, exactly where she said he'd been. He wagged his tail when he saw me, completely oblivious to how freaked out I was. I ate my sandwich and watched TV with my mom for a bit, trying to forget about what had happened. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid and headed back upstairs around 6:30. I sat at my desk and tried to focus on my homework again, but I couldn't concentrate. My room felt different somehow, colder, unwelcoming. I caught movement in my peripheral vision and turned toward my mirror. There, reflected in the glass, was Max again. But this time I could see from where I was sitting that there was nothing in my doorway to reflect. The mirror was showing something that wasn't actually there. I froze, staring at the reflection. Max, or whatever looked like Max, was just sitting there, head tilted slightly, looking directly at me through the mirror. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to look away, but I was terrified of what might happen if I kept watching. Then I had an idea. I slowly reached for my phone to take a picture of the mirror, but as soon as I moved, the reflection of Max disappeared, just vanished, like someone had switched off a projector. I sat there for a minute, heart pounding, before deciding to set a trap. I moved my jewelry holder from my dresser to my desk, positioning it so I could hide behind it while still watching the mirror. I pretended to leave the room, stomping my feet loudly and closing the door, but actually crouched behind the jewelry box, watching the mirror intently. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. My legs were starting to cramp from the awkward position when suddenly there was Max in the mirror again. Only this time, the reflection showed him sitting right next to me. I nearly screamed. I jerked my head to the side, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection showed Max sitting beside me, looking up with those innocent puppy eyes, but there was no actual dog there, nothing for the mirror to reflect. That's when I completely lost it. I bolted from my room and ran downstairs, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost, which I guess maybe I had. My mom was still in the living room, and yes, Max was still curled up on her lap, half asleep. My dad looked up from his newspaper, concerned by my panicked entrance. "What's wrong, Lisa? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, echoing my thoughts exactly. I couldn't tell them, not everything. They already thought I was sensitive from all the things I'd claimed to see as a kid. So I just mumbled something about a spider in my room and sat down with them, trying to stop shaking. But sitting there, trying to calm down, I started connecting dots from throughout my life. This wasn't the first weird thing that had happened, not by a long shot. When I was 12, food would sometimes fly off the table during dinner. My parents blamed our old cat, but I'd seen it happen when the cat wasn't even in the room. Objects would move around my bedroom at night. I'd hear footsteps when everyone else was asleep. Once, when I was 15 and crying under my blanket after a bad day at school, I felt someone pat my back gently. I thought it was my brother coming to check on me, but when I peeked out, he was sitting at his desk across the room with headphones on, completely unaware of my breakdown. These memories came flooding back as I sat there trying to process what had just happened upstairs. And suddenly, I realized something. There were two different types of weird experiences I'd had. There were the comforting ones, the back pat, the lady at the foot of my bed who never scared me, the feeling of not being alone when I was sad. And then there were the unsettling ones, the mimicking of my dad's voice, the fake Max, the cold feeling in my room. It hit me that there might be two different entities, spirits, whatever you want to call them, in our house. One that's been with me since I was little, maybe even protecting me, and another that's newer, darker, and trying to trick me by mimicking people and pets I trust. The thought made me shiver despite the warmth of the living room. What did the mimic want? Why was it pretending to be my family members? And if there really was some benign spirit that had been with me since childhood, why hadn't it driven the mimic away? After dinner, I reluctantly went back to my room. I had to sleep somewhere after all. I checked every corner, under the bed, in the closet, all the places you check as a kid when you're scared of monsters. Of course, I found nothing. I left my light on and tried to do more homework, but I couldn't focus. Around 11, I heard a strange scratching sound coming from my closet. Not loud, just the faintest scrape of something against wood. "Hello," I whispered, immediately feeling stupid for trying to talk to whatever it was. "I know you're there. Both of you." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "The one who's been here a long time, thank you for watching over me," I continued, not even sure why I was saying this. "The other one, the copycat, please leave us alone." Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then my desk lamp flickered once, twice, and went out, plunging the room into darkness except for the glow of my phone screen. In the dim light, I saw my closet door slowly creak open about an inch. I held my breath, expecting something to emerge, the fake Max maybe, or something worse. But instead a small object rolled out across my floor and stopped at my feet. It was an old marble I'd lost years ago, one my grandmother had given me before she died. I'd been devastated when it disappeared when I was 9 or 10. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It was cool to the touch and felt exactly as I remembered. As I held it, the temperature in my room suddenly warmed, becoming comfortable again. The oppressive feeling that had lingered since the incident with the mirror lifted. I don't know how to explain what happened next. It was like a conversation without words, a feeling of reassurance washing over me, followed by a distinct impression that I wasn't in danger, but I needed to be careful. That the mimic couldn't hurt me directly but wanted to frighten me for some reason. I slept with the marble clutched in my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't have nightmares. This morning everything feels normal again, but I know what I saw. The mimic is still here. I can feel it watching, waiting. But so is my protector, the spirit that's been with me since I was little. I'm going to start documenting everything strange that happens from now on. Maybe there's a pattern I can figure out. Maybe there's a reason why these things are in my house, in my life. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Am I losing my mind? Or is there something more going on in this house that I need to understand? Story 2. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before I started working as a night cleaner at Lakeside Medical Complex last year. I needed the money and the hours worked well with my online classes. The complex has 3 buildings: the main hospital, a pediatric daycare center, and a medical office building with various doctor practices. The pay was decent, and working alone at night didn't bother me. At first, I remember my 3rd week on the job like it was yesterday. That's when things started getting weird. I was cleaning the children's daycare center, just vacuuming the main play area when I first heard it. Someone called my name. Not just called it, but practically shouted it in this deep, distorted voice that didn't sound fully human. I yanked out my earbuds and froze. The voice called again. "Alex!" It sounded desperate, like someone needed help. I checked every room, closet, and storage area in that place. Nothing. Nobody. All doors were locked from the inside. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, or maybe sound traveling from somewhere else in the building. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. The daycare wasn't the only weird spot. The top floor of the medical office building always gave me the creeps. I'd be mopping or emptying trash bins and hear what sounded like a child cooing or giggling at 2 in the morning in an empty building. The first few times I checked every room thinking maybe someone had left their phone with a baby video playing. Nothing. My supervisor Dave just laughed when I mentioned it. "The night shift makes everyone a little crazy, Alex. Your brain fills in silence with whatever it wants you to hear." I tried to believe that. I really did. About 2 months into the job, I was working the medical office building. It was around 3 in the morning. I had my earphones in, blasting music while cleaning the 2nd floor windows. I've always liked looking out at the empty parking lot below, the street lamps casting these weird shadows. I was wiping down the big window at the end of the hallway when something caught my eye. Something black zipped past the window from left to right. I froze. The window was at least 30 feet off the ground. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing outside that window but a sheer drop to the pavement below. Nothing could be out there. No one could be out there, but I saw it, a dark mass, moving impossibly fast. I pulled out my earphones to listen. My fully charged wireless earbuds suddenly died, the light going from green to nothing in an instant. The hallway got so cold I could see my breath. Every single hair on my body stood straight up. I'm not talking about goosebumps. I mean the hair on my arms, neck, legs, everything just rose up. My skin felt like it was trying to crawl off my body. Then it happened. That black thing I'd seen outside the window flew past me inside the building, not just in the same hallway, inches from my face. So close I felt the air move. It wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. Not a person, not an animal, just a dark mass about the size of a large dog, but it moved nothing like a dog. I dropped my cleaning supplies and ran. I didn't even think, just pure instinct. I grabbed my backpack from the supply closet and headed for the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. At the main entrance, I had to stop to pull the doorstop from the door. We always propped it open with a rubber wedge while working. As I bent down to grab it, the temperature dropped again, that bone-chilling cold. I could see my breath coming in rapid puffs. Then I saw them, a pair of work boots standing about 3 feet away from me. Just the boots. No legs, no person. They looked worn, scuffed, the kind of boots a maintenance worker might wear. Before I could process what I was seeing, I felt a sharp, freezing pain in my left shoulder blade, like someone had pressed an ice pick into my skin. I yanked the doorstop out and ran straight to my car. I was shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. I kept checking my rearview mirror the entire drive home, convinced something was following me. I called in sick the next day and the day after. When I finally worked up the courage to call my supervisor, I quit on the spot. I told him I found another job closer to home. He didn't seem surprised. The turnover rate for night cleaners was pretty high. For about 3 weeks, I did odd jobs while looking for something more permanent. Then I got a call from the manager of one of the doctor's offices in the same complex. Dr. Reese's office needed a night cleaner and they'd heard I did good work. The pay was better, and I'd only be responsible for their suite of offices, not the entire building. I needed the money, and I figured, what are the chances of something weird happening twice? Besides, it was just one office in the complex, not the whole place. For the first month, everything was normal. I'd arrive at 9 when the office closed, clean everything, and be out by midnight. No voices, no weird sightings, no sudden cold spots. I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing before, or maybe there was some logical explanation. A gas leak causing hallucinations or something. Then it started again. I was cleaning the waiting room when I glimpsed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, person-sized, darting into the break room. I called out, thinking maybe one of the staff had stayed late. No answer. The break room was empty, and the only door out was the one I was standing in. A week later, I was vacuuming the hallway when I distinctly heard the office manager, Karen, call my name from the reception area. I stuck my head around the corner to respond, but no one was there. The next morning, I casually mentioned to the receptionist that Karen had been working late. She gave me a weird look and said Karen had been on vacation for the past 3 days. I started dreading going to work. I'd put it off until the last possible minute, then rush through my tasks, constantly looking over my shoulder. I started leaving lights on in every room, even though I was supposed to turn them off to save energy. The darkness felt threatening, like something was waiting in it. 2 months ago, I was cleaning the long hallway that connects the exam rooms when I noticed a shadow in the doorway of Dr. Reese's personal office. It was tall and broad-shouldered, just standing there. Before I could react, I heard Dr. Reese's voice clear as day. "Alex, could you help me move this desk?" Dr. Reese had left at 6 that evening. I'd seen him walk out to his car. There was no way he could be in his office. I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Alex, I need some help in here." The voice was coming from the empty office where I could clearly see there was no one inside. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran. I didn't even finish my shift. I left the vacuum in the middle of the hallway and got the hell out of there. The next day I called Karen and made up some excuse about a family emergency. I was terrified she'd fire me, but I couldn't bring myself to go back that night. She was surprisingly understanding and said I could come in the following evening. When I returned, I half expected to find the vacuum where I'd left it, but everything was in its place. No one mentioned anything unusual. I asked the day staff if anyone had been in the office after hours, and they all said no. Whatever was pretending to be Dr. Reese hasn't made another appearance, but the other things haven't stopped. I still see figures darting around corners. I still hear my name called in empty rooms. Last week I was in the supply closet when all the shelves started rattling. Not like an earthquake, more like someone was on the other side of the wall, deliberately shaking them. Just 3 nights ago, I was cleaning the staff bathroom when the lights flickered, then went out completely. Before I could reach for my phone to use as a flashlight, I felt something brush against the back of my neck, like cold, dry fingers. The lights came back on seconds later, and I was alone in the room. I don't know what to do anymore. I need this job, but I'm at the point where I dread going to work every night. I've tried wearing a cross, carrying salt in my pocket, read online that ghosts hate salt, and even playing religious music through my earbuds. None of it helps. The worst part is not knowing what these things want from me. Why call my name? Why appear and disappear? Why follow me from one building to another in the complex? Sometimes I think about that sharp pain in my shoulder blade from the night I ran out of the medical building. There's a small mark there now. A perfectly round, slightly discolored spot about the size of a dime. It's always cold to the touch, even when the rest of my skin is warm. I've never told anyone the full story until now. My friends would think I'm crazy, my family would worry, but I can't keep pretending everything's normal. Last night, while I was locking up, I distinctly heard children laughing from inside the storage room. When I checked, there was nothing there except medical supplies and that same bone-chilling cold. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Every night when I arrive at the office, I sit in my car for a few extra minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. And every night when I leave, I run to my car without looking back, afraid of what might be following me. Story 3. I still don't have an explanation for what I saw that night at Montauk. It's been nearly 6 years, and I've shared this story with only a handful of people. Some think I was half asleep and imagined it. Others suggest it was just a buoy or a piece of driftwood. But I know what I saw, and sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that figure standing in the water. This happened in late July 2017. I was 30 at the time, and a group of us had rented a beach house for a long weekend. Me, my girlfriend Emma, and 4 friends. The house wasn't anything fancy, just a weathered 2-story place about a 10-minute walk from the beach. We'd been planning this trip for months, just to get away from the city heat and relax. That particular evening started out normal enough. We grilled outside, had some beers, played cards. But around 11 p.m., Emma and I got into this stupid argument. I don't even remember what triggered it. Something about plans for Labor Day weekend and whether we were going to her parents' place or staying in the city. It was one of those fights that just escalates for no reason, fueled by a day of drinking and the fact that we'd both been working too much. After about 20 minutes of back and forth in hushed voices, trying not to ruin everyone else's night, I decided to just call it. I was tired and irritated, and the last thing I wanted was to keep arguing in a house where everyone could hear us. So I told Emma I was going to bed, and I'd see her in the morning when we'd both cooled off. I fell asleep quickly, but then woke up around 3:30 a.m. according to my phone. Emma hadn't come to bed yet, probably crashed on the couch downstairs. The house was completely quiet. I tried to fall back asleep for about 20 minutes, but my mind was racing with leftover thoughts from our argument. Plus, I had to pee from all the beer earlier. After tossing and turning, I decided to just get up. I pulled on some shorts and a hoodie, used the bathroom, and then had this sudden urge to go outside. It wasn't a planned thing. I just felt restless and figured some fresh air might help clear my head. I grabbed my phone, slipped on my sandals, and quietly made my way downstairs and out the back door. The night air was cool but not cold. Perfect beach weather. The moon was nearly full, casting this silvery light over everything. I could hear the distant sound of waves. Without really thinking about it, I started walking toward the beach. Our rental had access via this wooden staircase that cut down through some dense shrubs and beach grass. In the daylight, it was a scenic little path. At night, with just moonlight filtering through, it felt different. Not scary exactly, but more wild, like I was heading into some forgotten place. When I reached the beach, I was completely alone. The sand looked almost blue in the moonlight, and the water was this dark mass stretching out to the horizon. I'd brought my beach chair down earlier that day and left it stashed near the base of the stairs, so I grabbed it, set it up facing the ocean, and just sat there. For the first 20 minutes or so, it was peaceful. Just me, the rhythmic sound of waves, and the vastness of the Atlantic. I was starting to feel sleepy again, the tension from earlier melting away. That's when I heard something rustle in the beach grass behind me. I turned around, scanning the darkness where the beach met the shrubs at the bottom of the wooden stairs. At first I didn't see anything. Then I noticed 2 pairs of eyes reflecting the moonlight, maybe 20 yards away. They were set low to the ground, probably raccoons or maybe foxes. I wasn't alarmed. Wildlife is common in the area. I watched as they seemed to observe me for a moment, then slowly retreated up toward the cliff. After they disappeared, I turned back to face the ocean and must have dozed off in my chair. I woke with a start around 4:45 a.m., my neck stiff from the awkward position. What woke me was a sound, something moving quickly across the sand like the padding of feet. My first thought was that it was a deer running along the beach, which isn't unusual in the early morning hours. I stood up, stretched, and decided to walk along the shore. The sky was beginning to lighten just slightly, hinting that sunrise wasn't far off. I figured I'd walk between Shadmore State Park Beach and Ditch Plains Beach. It's about a half-mile stretch, and I thought it would be nice to catch the sunrise from a different vantage point. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when something caught my eye out in the water. At first glance, I thought it might be a buoy or maybe even a black swan, though I knew that would be unusual. It was still pretty dark, with just enough pre-dawn light to make out shapes on the horizon. I stopped walking and squinted, trying to get a better look. Whatever it was stood quite far out in the water, at least 100 yards from shore, maybe more. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with a jolt that it looked like a human figure, but that made no sense. The spot where it stood was too deep for anyone to be standing without a sandbar, and I knew there wasn't one there. Plus, who would be standing motionless in the ocean before 5 in the morning? I moved closer to the water's edge, my heart starting to beat faster. The figure was completely still, not moving with the waves, not adjusting position, just standing there. And as I stared, I realized another unsettling detail. It was tall, much taller than a normal person. From my estimation, it had to be at least 10 feet high. The figure was completely black, not just dark-skinned or wearing black clothing, but absent of any light reflection whatsoever. It was like looking at a human-shaped void in the world. Even with the limited light, everything else around it, the water, the horizon, had some texture or reflection. But this thing absorbed everything. I stood frozen, staring at it for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then, almost automatically, I pulled out my phone and took a photo. I don't know why I did that, maybe to convince myself later that I hadn't imagined it. The photo came out grainy and dark, but the silhouette was there, standing impossibly in the deep water. That's when the feeling hit me, this overwhelming sense of wrongness. It wasn't just fear, though I was definitely afraid. It was deeper than that, like my entire body was screaming at me that what I was seeing shouldn't exist. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and despite the mild night, I suddenly felt cold to my core. I backed away from the water's edge, not taking my eyes off the figure. It never moved, never turned toward me. Just stood there, facing out toward the horizon as if waiting for something. Finally, I turned and started walking quickly back toward our rental. Every few steps, I'd glance over my shoulder to see if it was still there. Each time I looked, it seemed smaller, as if it was sinking or receding with the tide. By the time I'd walked about a quarter mile, I couldn't see it anymore, but I needed to know if it was really gone. There was a small dune about 50 yards ahead that would give me a better vantage point. I climbed up and looked out over the water from this new angle. The sky was lighter now, the first hints of dawn turning the horizon a pale gray. I scanned the spot where the figure had been. Nothing. The water was empty. No figure, no buoy, no explanation for what I'd seen. I practically ran back to the house after that. I kept looking behind me, half expecting to see the figure emerging from the water and following me up the beach. But there was nothing. Just the empty shoreline and the steadily brightening sky. When I got back to the rental, everyone was still asleep. Emma was indeed on the living room couch, curled up under a throw blanket. I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I poured a glass of water. I felt drained and electric at the same time. I didn't wake anyone. Instead, I went upstairs, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling until I heard people moving around downstairs around 8. When Emma came up to check on me, I acted like everything was fine. We made up from our argument, and I didn't mention what I'd seen. I wasn't ready to talk about it, and honestly, I wasn't sure what I would even say. Later that day, I tried to casually ask one of the locals working at a coffee shop if they'd ever heard of strange sightings on the beach. The guy gave me this look, not surprised or confused, but almost like he was measuring whether I was someone he could talk to about this. "You mean around Camp Hero?" he asked. I hadn't made the connection myself, but he was right. We were staying just a few miles from the old military base that's wrapped up in all those conspiracy theories about the Montauk Project. I nodded, and he lowered his voice. People see stuff around here all the time, lights where there shouldn't be any, feeling like they're being watched when they're alone on the beach, time acting weird. He shrugged. Some say it's leftover energy from whatever they were doing at that base, government experiments and all that. I wanted to ask more, but another customer came in, and the moment passed. I never did bring it up with my friends. What would I say? Hey, I saw a 10-foot tall black figure standing motionless in deep water at dawn. They'd think I was losing it. I've looked at that photo hundreds of times since then. It's not clear, just a dark silhouette against slightly less dark water. Most people I've shown it to, the very few I've trusted with this story, say it could be anything, a post, a buoy, a smudge on the lens, but they didn't see it. They didn't feel that bone-deep dread that washed over me. I've researched the Montauk Project stuff since then. The claims about mind control experiments, time travel, contact with other dimensions. Most of it sounds like conspiracy theory nonsense. But sometimes when I wake up at 3:30 a.m. for no reason, I wonder if what I saw was somehow connected to whatever weird history that place has. I still can't explain what I saw standing in the water that morning. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. But then I remember how it didn't move with the waves, how impossibly tall it was, how it seemed to be gradually sinking or receding rather than walking away. And I know, whatever it wasn't natural. It wasn't something that belongs in our world. And sometimes I worry that it's still out there, standing in the dark water, waiting. Story 4. I never believed in ghosts. I'm not what you'd call a spiritual person. I've always prided myself on being practical and level-headed. But what happened after we moved into our home in Pinewood has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. My husband Mark and I had been searching for a house for months. The market was brutal, and everything in our price range was getting snatched up with cash offers way above asking. So when we found this 4-bedroom ranch-style home in rural Texas for just $200,000, we jumped on it. The real estate agent seemed eager to close quickly, which should have been our first red flag, but we were just thrilled to finally have a place to call our own. It wasn't until after closing that we learned the truth from our next-door neighbor, Ellen. The previous owners, an elderly couple in their 80s, had died in the home. Their bodies weren't discovered for 3 weeks. Ellen told us this casually over the fence while I was planting flowers, like she was discussing the weather. I nearly dropped my trowel. They were good people, Ellen said. Such a shame. Their kids live out of state, and when they couldn't reach them on the phone, they just figured the landline was down again. By the time anyone checked, well, I immediately called our realtor, furious that this hadn't been disclosed. She calmly explained that Texas law only requires disclosure of murders or suicides, not natural deaths. The family had used insurance money to clean and disinfect the property, and legally they'd done nothing wrong. I was livid, but what could we do? The house was ours now. Mark tried to reassure me that it was fine. People die in houses all the time, he said. We'd gotten a great deal, and we weren't going to let this spook us. The first weird thing happened while Mark was at work. I was alone, unpacking boxes in the living room. I'd been feeling uncomfortable all morning, like someone was watching me. Finally, I'd had enough. Standing in the middle of the room, I said firmly, "This is my house now. You need to leave." I wasn't expecting anything to happen. I just felt silly talking to an empty room. But the moment those words left my mouth, the front door, which I definitely closed, swung open with a long, slow creak. There was no wind, no draft, just the door opening by itself. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that, right? Our first night sleeping in the house, we were all exhausted from moving. Our 4-year-old son, Jamie, fell asleep immediately in his new room, and our 6-month-old baby, Lily, was asleep in her crib in our bedroom. Around 2 a.m, Mark and I both jolted awake to a loud bang from the bathroom. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, already reaching for the baseball bat we'd propped against the nightstand. We crept to the bathroom together, hearts pounding. Nothing seemed out of place. Mark checked the shower, behind the door, everywhere. Nothing. We checked on the kids, both still fast asleep. We searched the whole house but found nothing unusual. The next morning, I went to run Jamie's bath and found all his bath toys piled in the tub. I distinctly remembered unpacking those toys and placing them in the plastic bin on the bathroom shelf. When I asked Mark if he'd moved them, he looked at me like I was crazy. "Why would I dump all the toys in the tub in the middle of the night?" he asked. That's when I noticed the shower curtain rod was slightly bent, as if something heavy had hit it. The toys must have fallen somehow, causing the bang we heard. But how did they jump from the shelf into the tub? A few days later, I was feeding Lily in the living room when our Amazon Echo lit up. "I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question," Alexa's robotic voice announced. Neither Mark nor I had said anything. "That was weird," I said. Mark shrugged. "Probably picked up something from the TV." But the TV wasn't on. This happened repeatedly over the next few weeks. We'd be sitting quietly, and suddenly Alexa would respond to questions no one had asked. Once at 3 in the morning, we woke to Alexa playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star at full volume. When we checked the app history, there was no record of anyone activating it. Then there were the owls. Every night around midnight, we'd hear owls hooting outside our bedroom window. The strange thing was, they never seemed to move. Always in the exact same spot. Always the same pattern of hoots. When I mentioned it to Ellen, she looked confused. "Owls? We don't have owls around here," she said. "Haven't heard an owl in 20 years of living in Pinewood." But we heard them every single night. The doorbell started ringing at odd hours. The first time I ran to answer it, thinking it might be a package delivery. Nobody was there. The second time, Mark checked the security camera we'd installed after the first incident. The footage showed the doorbell ringing, but no one was visible on the porch. This happened at least once a week, always when we were home alone with the kids. Netflix became a nightmare. We'd be watching a show, and it would suddenly pause, then resume, then skip ahead 10 minutes. We replaced the remote, thinking the batteries were dying. We reset the TV. We even called our internet provider to check for service issues. Nothing helped. Our German Shepherd, Rex, had always been a quiet, well-behaved dog. He never barked without reason. But in this house, he started growling at empty corners, his hackles raised, teeth bared at nothing we could see. He'd wake us in the middle of the night, standing at the foot of our bed, barking furiously at the bedroom door. When we'd turn on the lights and check, there was never anything there. The most unsettling thing was Lily's behavior. Our baby girl, only 6 months old, started laughing hysterically in her sleep. Not cute little baby giggles, I mean full-on belly laughs, the kind that made her whole body shake. The first time it happened, I thought she was awake, but when I picked her up, her eyes remained closed, her body limp with sleep, even as those unnatural laughs continued to pour from her tiny mouth. The electrical issues were constant. Lights would flicker and dim for no reason. Brand new light bulbs would burn out within days of being installed. We replaced switches, had an electrician check the wiring, even installed a whole new electrical panel at considerable expense. The problems persisted. Then there was the case of the vanishing blanket. We had this king-sized, heavy-knitted throw that my grandmother had made. One day, it simply disappeared. We tore the house apart looking for it, checked every closet, under every bed, in the attic, the garage, even the crawl space. It was gone, as if it had never existed. We didn't tell many people about the strange occurrences. I didn't want to be labeled as that crazy family in our new community. But when Thanksgiving rolled around and Mark's family came to visit, we couldn't hide it anymore. Mark's sister-in-law, Jen, got violently ill within an hour of arriving. "I feel like I can't breathe in here," she gasped before rushing outside. She felt better immediately in the fresh air, but refused to come back inside. His brother Dave, always the skeptic, laughed it off until that night. Dave was smoking on the back porch around midnight when he came running inside, white as a sheet. "There's something out there," he said, his voice shaking. I saw a beam of light hit Mark's truck, like a spotlight from above, but there's nothing there to cast it. By Christmas, even Mark couldn't deny something was wrong. Maybe we should get the house blessed, he suggested one night, after Rex had spent 20 minutes barking at the hallway closet. I laughed bitterly. I thought you didn't believe in that stuff. I don't know what I believe anymore, he admitted. It was Ellen who eventually gave us a possible explanation. She mentioned casually that the elderly couple who died, the Millers, had been found with their fireplace still burning. Such a shame, she said. Their chimney flues were all rusted shut. Fire department said they probably died from carbon monoxide poisoning, just went to sleep and never woke up. This gave us pause. Could carbon monoxide explain some of what we'd experienced? The headaches, the weird visions, maybe even some of the electronic malfunctions. We immediately bought detectors for every room, but they never showed dangerous levels. Still, we had the chimneys inspected and sure enough, the flues were indeed rusted shut. We had them repaired, hoping this might solve our problems. It didn't. The incidents continued, monthly reminders that something wasn't right in our home. We weren't terrified exactly. Whatever was happening didn't seem malicious, just persistent. Like the previous owners were letting us know they were still there, watching us live our lives in their space. The strangest part, I found myself talking to them sometimes. When I'd be alone in the kitchen, I'd say things like, "The cookies are for Jamie's class, but I'll leave 2 for you on the counter." And those cookies would be gone in the morning, even though Mark swore he didn't eat them. We've been here for almost a year now. Last week, I was going through some old moving boxes in the garage and found a photo that must have been left by the previous owners. It showed an elderly couple sitting on our front porch, smiling. I recognized them from the description Ellen had given me, the Millers. That night, I placed the photo on our mantel. "You can stay," I whispered to the empty room. "Just please stop messing with Netflix." For the first time in months, we slept through the night without incident. No doorbell, no barking, no Alexa activations. The next morning I noticed the photo had been turned slightly, angled toward the couch, our favorite spot to watch TV. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe that there are things in this world that we can't explain. Energy that lingers, perhaps, memories embedded in walls. Whatever is happening in our house in Pinewood, we've reached an understanding. This is our home now, but in some small way, it will always be theirs too. And honestly, for a 4-bedroom ranch in this market at $200,000, we can live with a few unexplained phenomena, even if it means occasionally having to tell Alexa to stop playing music at 3 in the morning. Story 5. I've never told this story to anyone outside of she and Catan. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, and honestly, I'm terrified that talking about these things might bring them back. But I need answers, and maybe someone here has encountered something similar. It all started when I was 10. My family and I were living in rural Pennsylvania at the time in a small house with woods behind our backyard. I used to love exploring those woods. They were dense but peaceful, with well-worn paths from local hikers. One afternoon in early October, I decided to go for a walk while my mom was cooking dinner. The leaves were changing colors, and I wanted to collect some pretty ones for a school project. I remember it was around 5 in the evening, still light out but getting dimmer. The air had that crisp fall feeling that makes everything seem clearer somehow. I was about 15 minutes into my usual route when I first heard the wind chimes. This struck me as weird because there weren't any houses nearby. The sound was soft at first, like it was coming from far away, but it gradually got louder as I walked deeper into the woods. It wasn't scary at first, actually kind of pretty and soothing. But then I felt this weird sensation, like the air was getting thicker. It's hard to explain, but it felt like walking through invisible cobwebs, and it got colder, way colder than it should have been for October. I could suddenly see my breath in front of my face. That's when I saw it. Between 2 large oak trees about 20 feet ahead of me stood this thing. I still struggle to describe it accurately, but I'll try. It was tall, way taller than any person I'd ever seen, had to be at least 10 feet high. It had the shape of a person, kind of like a bodybuilder with really defined muscles, but it was completely white. Not like paper white or white clothing, it was a stark, unnatural white that almost seemed to glow against the darker woods. No hair, no clothes, just this massive white figure. The worst part was its face. It didn't really have features except for two black eyes, small, round, and completely black, like beads pushed into a snowman. When I looked into them, I felt wrong, like my thoughts weren't my own anymore. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and sprint back home. But when I locked eyes with that thing, I couldn't move. No, that's not right. I could move, but I didn't want to run. I wanted to walk toward it. I actually took 3 steps forward before I heard my mom's voice calling me for dinner. The sound of her voice snapped me out of whatever trance I was in. I blinked, and suddenly I was terrified again. When I looked back at the creature, it tilted its head to the side, like a confused dog. Then it took a step back and just disappeared. Not like it walked away or faded. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The wind chime sound stopped at the exact same moment. I ran all the way home, tripping twice and scraping my knees badly. When I burst through the door, my mum took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I couldn't tell her. I was afraid she'd think I was making it up, or worse, that she'd believe me and never let me go outside again. So I blamed my scraped knees and said I got spooked by a deer. For weeks after that, I refused to go back into those woods. I told my parents I was bored of them, that I'd rather play in the front yard where I could see my friends ride by on their bikes. I think they were just happy I wasn't wandering off alone anymore. The nightmares started shortly after. In them, I'd be back in those woods, but it would be darker, and I could never find the path home. The white creature would always be there, sometimes watching from a distance, sometimes right behind me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing those damn wind chimes. 3 years passed. My dad got a job offer in Texas, and we moved. I was 13 by then, and I'd managed to convince myself that what I saw that day was just my imagination. Kids see weird stuff sometimes, right? The nightmares had mostly stopped, and I hadn't heard the wind chimes since we left Pennsylvania. Texas was hot and flat and nothing like Pennsylvania, but I adjusted. I didn't make friends easily at my new school. I was shy and had that new kid stigma that's hard to shake. So I spent a lot of time online playing Minecraft and other games. That's how I met she and Katan. We met on a public Minecraft server about 4 months after I moved to Texas. She was 16 and lived in Minnesota. Katan was 14 and lived in Arizona. We hit it off immediately and started playing together regularly, eventually moving to Discord to chat while we played. They became my best friends, even though we'd never met in person. For about a year, life was good. I still didn't have many friends at school, but I had she and Katan online, and that was enough. We talked every day, played games for hours, and told each other everything. Well, almost everything. I never told them about the creature in the woods. There was no reason to. It was ancient history, until Shie saw it too. We were on a video call one night, just hanging out. She suddenly went quiet in the middle of a sentence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, tight and scared. "Guys, there's something in my yard." Katan and I thought he was joking at first, trying to scare us, but then Shai turned his laptop around to show his bedroom window, which looked out onto his backyard and the edge of some woods. It was dark outside, but we could see it, that same white figure standing perfectly still at the tree line. Even through the grainy video and the darkness, I recognized it instantly. The same towering height, the same muscular build, the same featureless white body. "What the fuck is that?" Katan whispered. I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry, and my heart was hammering in my chest. The thing outside She's window wasn't moving, just standing there like it was watching the house, watching him. "Should I wake up my parents?" Shai asked, his voice shaking. Before either of us could answer, the creature stepped backward into the trees and vanished, just like before, there 1 second, gone the next. She turned the laptop back around, his face pale. "Tell me you guys saw that." We both nodded. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I told them about what happened in Pennsylvania, about the woods, the wind chimes, the eyes that seemed to control my mind. As I spoke, I could see the color draining from both their faces. We need to figure out what these things are, Catan said when I finished. That night, we stayed up until morning researching. Shai started calling them demo walkers because of how they just appeared and disappeared like a demonstration or a glitch. We searched for tall white creatures, entities that control minds, unexplained phenomena in wooded areas, anything that might give us a clue. We found stories about Slender Man, but that wasn't right. These weren't fictional creepypasta characters. These were real things that she and I had both seen. The next few weeks were tense. We kept our video calls going almost constantly, afraid to be alone. She set up a camera pointing out his window, but it never captured anything unusual. I started hearing the wind chimes again, usually at night when I was trying to sleep. I didn't tell my parents. What would I even say? Then it happened. I was home alone after school, in my bathroom washing my hands, when I glanced up at the mirror and saw it. The demo walker was standing in the doorway behind me, its head nearly touching the top of the frame. I froze, unable to scream, unable to move. In the mirror, I watched as it tilted its head again, that same curious gesture from years ago. The wind chime sound filled the bathroom, louder than I'd ever heard it before. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at its reflection, too terrified to turn around. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Catan asking if I was okay, and the spell broke. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. I ran to my room, locked the door, and called she and Catan. When they answered, I was crying so hard I could barely speak. It was in my house. I finally managed to get out. In my fucking bathroom. They stayed on the call with me until my parents got home. I didn't tell my parents what happened. They would have thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. 2 days later, Catan and I were on a video call while she was at soccer practice. I was sitting on my bed, laptop propped on my knees, when Catan's expression suddenly changed. He went completely still, eyes fixed on something behind me. "Lily," he said, his voice barely audible. "Don't turn around. There's one of them on your stairs." I felt the cold before I heard the wind chimes, that same unnatural chill from the woods all those years ago. The chimes started softly, then grew louder. I wanted to run, but where would I go? It was in my house. "What's it doing?" I whispered. "Just standing there," Catan said, "watching you." Then he gasped. "It's making a noise. Can you hear that?" I could. Beneath the sound of the wind chimes was a new sound, a soft, rhythmic hissing like air slowly being let out of a balloon. It had never made noise before. "I think it's trying to communicate," Catan said. That was when things got even worse. The nightmares returned, but they were different now, more vivid, more horrifying. In these dreams, I'd watch helplessly as the demo walkers hurt she and Catan. They'd tear she apart while he screamed for help. They'd drag Catan into the woods, and then they'd surround me, their black eyes staring as I tried to run. I'd always wake up right as they reached for me, the sound of wind chimes ringing in my ears. The worst part was that she and Catan were having the same dreams. We'd compare notes the next day, and the details would match perfectly. How was that even possible? We tried to find answers. We researched folklore, paranormal phenomena, even neurological conditions that might explain shared hallucinations. Nothing fit. We found some obscure references to watchers or guardians in various mythologies that sounded similar, but nothing concrete enough to help us. The encounters kept escalating. She saw one standing at the foot of his bed one night. Catan found strange white footprints, too big to be human, outside his window. I started hearing the hissing sounds, even when I couldn't see them, usually accompanied by the wind chimes. We were desperate for help, but who would believe us? 3 teenagers in 3 different states, all seeing the same impossible creatures. We'd be labeled as pranksters or mentally ill. One night, about 2 months after she's first sighting, we were all on a call together. It was late past midnight for all of us. We were tired but too scared to sleep. That's when she suddenly went quiet. "There's 3 of them in my yard," he finally said, his voice eerily calm. They're just standing there watching my window. Katan and I begged him to wake his parents, to hide, to do something, but Shai just kept staring at his window. I can hear them talking to each other, he said. The hissing, it's like a language. Then his video froze. The audio cut out too. Katan and I called his name over and over, but there was no response. After 5 terrifying minutes, his video came back. He was still there, still staring at the window, but something was different. His expression was blank, his eyes unfocused. Shai, I said, are you okay? He turned to look at the camera, and my blood went cold. His eyes were wrong. Still blue, still his, but there was something else behind them. They're coming for you next, he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. Then his video cut out completely. We couldn't reach him after that. Not that night, not the next day. His Discord showed him offline. His phone went straight to voicemail. Katan and I were frantic. We considered calling the police in his town, but what would we say? 2 days later, Shai came back online. He claimed his internet had been down and his phone broken. He said he didn't remember telling us about the demo walkers in his yard or the strange message. He seemed normal in most ways, but something was off. He used phrases he never had before. He couldn't remember inside jokes we'd shared for months. Katan was convinced it wasn't really Shai anymore, that the demo walkers had done something to him. I wanted to believe it was just the stress getting to all of us, but deep down I knew Katan was right. Whatever was talking to us through Shi's account wasn't Shi anymore. That was 3 days ago. Last night, I woke up to wind chimes and opened my eyes to find my room filled with them. 5 demo walkers standing in a circle around my bed, their black eyes fixed on me. The hissing was deafening, no longer the gentle sound from before, but an urgent, angry noise. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. One of them reached out a long, white hand toward my face. I must have passed out from fear, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. My room was empty, and everything looked normal, except for the white footprints on my carpet, and the text from Shai saying simply, "They're coming for you next." Katan isn't answering my calls now. His Discord status has been offline for 24 hours. I'm typing this with my back against the wall, jumping at every sound. The wind chimes started again about an hour ago, faint, but getting louder. I don't know what these creatures are or what they want. I don't know if Shi and Katan are okay. I don't know what to do. So I'm asking, has anyone else seen these things? Does anyone know what they are or how to make them go away? Because I think they're in my house again. I can hear the hissing coming from downstairs, and the wind chimes are getting louder. Story 6. I still remember the first night I heard it. I was 7 years old, tucked into my bed with my stuffed panda bear clutched against my chest. Our family had just moved into the 2-story house on Maple Drive 3 days earlier. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets lined with oak trees, kids riding bikes on the sidewalks, and a park just 2 blocks away. Everything a growing family could want. That night, I woke up around 1 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just the unfamiliarity of the new house that had disturbed my sleep. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen downstairs. It wasn't subtle either. It sounded exactly like someone was unloading the dishwasher, with plates and glasses clinking against each other, silverware rattling, and pots and pans occasionally banging together. My first thought was that my mom was up doing some late-night cleaning. She sometimes got these bursts of energy where she'd reorganize the entire kitchen or clean out a closet at weird hours. But this was different. The noises were more chaotic, lacking the methodical pattern of someone actually putting things away. I remember sliding out of bed, my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor, and tiptoeing to my bedroom door. When I opened it, the sounds became clearer, a persistent rhythmic clanging that echoed up the stairwell. My parents' bedroom door was closed, and I could see no light coming from downstairs. That first night I was too scared to investigate further. I crawled back into bed, pulled the covers over my head, and eventually fell asleep to the sound of phantom dishware being shuffled around in our kitchen. The next morning I asked my mom about it over breakfast. "Mom, were you doing dishes really late last night?" She looked at me with slight confusion. "No, honey, I went to bed right after you." "Why?" "I heard dishes moving around in the kitchen. It was really loud." She smiled and ruffled my hair. "Oh, that's probably just our domovoi getting used to the new house." "What's a domovoi?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "It's like a house elf from the old country. My babushka used to tell me stories about them. They protect the home and sometimes make little noises at night. Nothing to worry about." Her explanation satisfied my 7-year-old mind. If Mom wasn't worried, why should I be? I figured every house must have these noises, and this was just part of growing up. I accepted it as normal and went about my day. But the sounds continued every night. Sometimes they'd start right after everyone went to bed, around 10 or 11. Other times they'd wake me up at 3 in the morning. The intensity varied. Some nights it was just occasional clinks and clatters, like someone gently sorting silverware. Other nights, especially when there was a storm outside, the kitchen sounded like a restaurant during the dinner rush. Pots banging, plates crashing, cupboards opening and closing. What was strangest to me was how localized the sound was. It never spread beyond the kitchen. No footsteps, no other disturbances, just the dishes. Always the dishes. After a few weeks, I got used to it. I'd fall asleep to the distant soundtrack of kitchenware in motion. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I'd lie awake and try to identify patterns in the sounds, almost like they were trying to communicate something. My little brother was born about a year after we moved in, and he never seemed bothered by the noises either. I assumed he thought it was normal too. We lived in that house for 7 years, and not once did the clamoring stop. It became such a regular part of our lives that we stopped mentioning it. When friends stayed over for sleepovers, I'd casually warn them about the house noises without going into detail. Most of them would comment on it the next morning. "Your house is really noisy at night," but I'd just shrug it off. "Yeah, old houses, you know." When I was 14, my dad got a job offer in another state, and we moved. Our new house was newer, built in the 90s rather than the 30s like our old place. The first few nights, I found it eerily quiet. No clamoring dishes, no kitchen symphony to lull me to sleep. I actually had trouble falling asleep without it. But then, about a week into living in the new house, it started again. Not as loud or persistent as before, but definitely there. The sound of dishes being moved around in the kitchen when everyone was in bed. It was familiar and almost comforting in a weird way, like an old friend had followed us to our new home. Years passed. I went to college, moved into dorms, and then apartments with roommates. The dish noises never followed me to those places. When I'd visit home during breaks, they were still there, albeit fainter than I remembered. Fast forward to my 26th birthday, I was having dinner with my parents and some close friends at my parents' house, their third home since the one on Maple Drive. The conversation turned to ghost stories and unexplained phenomena. After a few drinks, people started sharing their own experiences, most of which were pretty tame, strange coincidences, déjà vu moments, that sort of thing. When it was my turn, I laughed and said, "Well, growing up, our house on Maple Drive had this funny habit of doing the dishes in the middle of the night." Everyone looked at me quizzically. "You know, that thing where the dishes in the kitchen make noise at night, like they're being moved around or sorted. Mom used to tell me it was a domovoi." The table fell silent. My friends exchanged glances. My mom's face went pale. "What?" I asked, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Doesn't everyone's house do that?" One of my friends slowly shook her head. "I've never experienced anything like that. That sounds unsettling." I looked at my mom, expecting her to back me up, to explain about the domovoi and how it was just a quirky thing old houses did. Instead, she took a long sip of her wine and avoided my gaze. After dinner, when everyone had left and I was helping clean up, I cornered her in the kitchen. "Mom, about what I said earlier, was that not normal? The dish noises at night?" She sighed deeply. and leaned against the counter. I didn't want to scare you when you were little. You were already having trouble adjusting to the move, and I didn't want to give you another reason to be afraid of the house. So it wasn't a domovoi? No, honey, I made that up to make it seem less frightening. She paused, absent-mindedly wiping down the counter. The truth is, those noises terrified me and your father. Sometimes they were so loud I was sure someone had broken in. Your dad checked the kitchen countless times in the middle of the night, but there was never anyone there. The dishes were always exactly where we'd left them, not a single one out of place. I felt a chill run down my spine, but we heard it for years, every single night. I know, we spoke to the previous owners once at a community event. I casually asked if they'd ever experienced anything unusual in the house. They changed the subject so quickly. I knew they had heard it too. They just didn't want to admit it. And what about the noises in the next house? And this one? I still hear them sometimes when I visit. My mom shook her head. Different houses settle differently. What we hear now is normal. Pipes expanding and contracting, the refrigerator running, maybe a few dishes shifting as they cool after being washed. But what we heard on Maple Drive? She trailed off, a distant look in her eyes. That was something else entirely. That conversation shook me more than I care to admit. All those years, I had normalized something that was far from normal. I started asking friends if they'd ever experienced similar phenomena in their childhood homes. The answers were always no, often accompanied by concerned looks or suggestions that maybe we had mice or raccoons getting into the kitchen. But I know what I heard. It wasn't rodents. It wasn't the house settling. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost purposeful, like invisible hands sorting through our kitchen night after night, looking for something they could never find. I'm 32 now and live alone in a small apartment downtown. My kitchen is silent at night. Sometimes I almost miss the clamoring, as strange as that sounds. I've researched paranormal phenomena, looked up the history of our old house on Maple Drive, even joined online forums for people who've experienced unexplained events. I've never found a satisfactory explanation. Last month I drove past our old house while visiting my hometown. New people live there now. I could see children's toys in the yard and fresh paint on the shutters. I wondered if they hear it too, the nightly symphony of dishware in motion. I wondered if they've convinced themselves it's normal or if they lie awake at night, wondering who or what is rummaging through their kitchen when everyone is asleep. The clamoring dishes remain the greatest mystery of my life, a shared family secret we never fully understood. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, straining to hear those familiar sounds. But my apartment stays silent, leaving me to wonder if whatever followed us from that first house has finally found what it was looking for all along. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and honestly, I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar. I work as a medical examiner in Meadowbrook, and I've always prided myself on being rational and level-headed. My job requires me to be analytical and evidence-based. I deal with death every day, so you'd think I'd be immune to being spooked. But what happened in my colleague's home has shaken me to my core. For privacy reasons, I'll call my colleague Anna, not her real name. We've worked together for nearly 4 years, and she's one of the most pragmatic people I know. She's not the type to jump at shadows or believe in ghost stories. If anything, she's even more skeptical than I am. That's what makes this whole thing so disturbing. Anna has a 5-year-old son named Tim, who was born with a mild heart condition. Nothing life-threatening, but it requires monitoring, especially when he sleeps. They keep a baby camera in his room that records both video and audio. It's a pretty sophisticated setup. Motion detection, night vision, the works. The camera uploads everything to their phones so they can check on him anytime. It all started about 2 months ago. Anna came to work looking exhausted. When I asked if she was okay, she hesitated before telling me what happened the night before. At first, I thought it was just a case of a child having nightmares, but as she showed me the footage, I felt a chill run down my spine. Anna had come home late from a double shift. Her husband was already asleep since he had to be up at 4 in the morning for his job. She checked on Tim before going to bed and found his bedroom door wide open. This immediately struck her as odd because they have a child guard on his door, one of those devices that prevents little kids from being able to open doors. It's a plastic cover that goes over the doorknob and makes it nearly impossible for small hands to grip and turn it. She went into his room and found Tim sleeping peacefully. She gave him a kiss, closed the door, and went to bed. Nothing unusual happened until around 3 in the morning when Tim came running into their bedroom, hysterical and trembling. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. Anna and her husband tried to calm him down, but he kept pointing toward his room and saying he didn't want to go back in there. Once they finally got him to settle down, he told them that a big man with a hat and glowing eyes had been in his room and told him to go away. Anna assumed it was just a nightmare, but her husband suggested they check the baby camera footage just to reassure Tim that no one had been in his room. That's when things got weird. The footage showed Tim sleeping soundly in his bed. The timestamp on the video was 2:47 in the morning. Everything was normal until 2:51, when the door to his room slowly swung open. The hallway light was on, so there should have been a shadow if someone was standing in the doorway, but there was nothing. The door just opened by itself. The camera didn't record what happened next because it only saves footage when it detects motion, and apparently whatever happened didn't trigger the motion sensor. The next clip shows Tim sitting bolt upright in bed at 2:58, looking terrified, then scrambling out of bed and running out of the room. When Anna showed me this footage on her phone, I immediately tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe the child guard wasn't properly installed. Maybe it was a draft that pushed the door open. But Anna said they'd checked everything. The child guard was secure, and there are no windows in Tim's room that would create a draft strong enough to push open a door. What really disturbed me was Tim's description of the man with the hat and glowing eyes. Kids have nightmares all the time, but this was oddly specific, and the fact that the door had actually opened on its own seemed to confirm that something strange had happened. Anna told me that Tim refused to sleep in his room for the next week. He kept saying the man would come back. They eventually convinced him to sleep in his own bed again, but only after Anna's husband installed a bolt lock on the inside of Tim's door, one that's high enough that Tim can't reach it, but would allow him to feel safe knowing nobody could come in. I tried to put the incident out of my mind. Working with death makes you develop a thick skin, and I've trained myself to focus on evidence and facts rather than spooky stories. But then things got weirder. About a week after Anna first told me about the incident, she came to work looking even more exhausted than before. She said strange things had started happening in their house, objects moving from where they'd been left, doors that had been closed, found open in the morning. At first she thought Tim might be sleepwalking, but their home security system showed no movement during the night. The most disturbing development was that Tim had started talking about a little girl who played with him. Anna wasn't too concerned about this. Imaginary friends are common at that age. But what made her uneasy was that Tim insisted the girl was hiding from the man with the hat. 2 weeks ago, Anna invited me over for dinner. I think she wanted someone else to witness what was happening, someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss her as being paranoid. Her husband was working late, so it was just the three of us. Tim seemed like a normal, happy kid, running around and showing me his toys. Nothing out of the ordinary. After dinner, while Tim was watching TV in the living room, Anna took me upstairs to show me his bedroom. It was a typical kid's room. Dinosaur bedspread, toys scattered around, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The baby camera was mounted on the wall opposite his bed, giving a clear view of the entire room. Anna showed me the child guard on the door, and I have to admit, it was sturdy. There's no way a 5-year-old could manipulate it. She also showed me the bolt lock they'd installed higher up on the door. As we were standing there, we heard a crash from downstairs. We rushed down to find a large picture frame had fallen off the wall. It had been hanging in the hallway for years without issue. The weird part? Tim was still sitting exactly where we'd left him, engrossed in his cartoon, and hadn't moved. I helped Anna clean up the broken glass, and we tried to laugh it off. Old nail, loose wire happens all the time, right? But I could tell she was shaken. Before I left that night, Tim tugged on my sleeve and asked me very seriously if I could see the little girl. When I said no, he nodded knowingly and said, "She only comes out when she feels safe." That night after I got home, Anna sent me another video clip from the baby camera. It was from the previous night. The footage showed Tim's room in the dark, with Tim sleeping. The timestamp read 1:17 in the morning. Suddenly, the bolt lock, the one installed high on the door where Tim couldn't reach, slid open with a click. A few seconds later, the door slowly swung open. Just like before, the hallway light was on, but no shadow appeared in the doorway. The camera didn't pick up any movement after that, but the next clip showed Tim sitting up in bed at 1:22, staring at something off camera. His lips were moving like he was talking to someone, but the microphone didn't pick up any sound. I've watched that clip at least 20 times now. I've analyzed it frame by frame, looking for signs of tampering or technical glitches, but there's nothing. The bolt simply slides open on its own, and the door swings open. No visible cause. No explanation. Last week, Anna came to work with dark circles under her eyes. She said Tim had woken up screaming again in the middle of the night. This time, he said the man with the hat had been standing at the foot of his bed, watching him. The baby camera didn't catch anything unusual that night except for the door opening again on its own. Anna and her husband are at their wits' end. They've had an electrician check for wiring issues that might affect the camera. They've had a locksmith examine the doors. Everything is in working order. There's no logical explanation for what's happening. I've always been a skeptic. In my line of work, you learn to trust evidence and facts, but I've seen the footage with my own eyes. I've felt the unease in that house. Something is happening that I can't explain, and it terrifies me. Last night, Anna called me at 2 in the morning. She was whispering, her voice shaking. She said she'd been woken up by a noise from Tim's room. When she checked the live feed from the camera on her phone, she saw his door standing open again, despite the bolt lock. She went to check on him and found him sitting up in bed, talking to thin air. When she asked him who he was talking to, he said, "The little girl. She says we need to leave before the man with the hat comes back." Anna asked me to come over today to watch the footage from last night. I'm heading there after work. Part of me doesn't want to see whatever she's found, but I can't leave her to deal with this alone. I don't know what's happening in that house. I've spent my career dealing with the dead, but I've never believed they could come back to haunt us. Now I'm not so sure. The specificity of Tim's description, the door opening on its own, the bolt sliding open, it all points to something I can't explain away with science or logic. The thing that haunts me most is the question, if there really is a man with a hat and glowing eyes, what does he want with a 5-year-old boy? And who is this little girl Tim keeps talking to? Is she trying to warn them, or is she part of whatever is happening? I'll update if I learn anything new, but right now, I'm genuinely afraid of what I might see on that footage. In all my years as a medical examiner, nothing has unsettled me like this. Death, I understand. This is something else entirely. Story 8. I've never told this story outside my close circle of friends and family. Even now, typing this out makes my hands shake a little. I'm 39 years old, and I still get chills thinking about what happened to me when I was in 3rd grade at Julius Marks Elementary in Lexington. This was during the 88 to 89 school year. I was 8 years old, a pretty normal kid, not particularly imaginative actually. My parents always said I was pragmatic even as a little kid. I liked facts, science, and was usually the one telling other kids that monsters weren't real. I wasn't afraid of the dark and never checked under my bed for creatures. That's important to understand, because what happened to me that day changed everything. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember because we had decorated paper pumpkins in class that morning, and mine was sitting in my backpack. I stayed after school for an art program they offered twice a week. My mom worked until 5, so these after-school activities were convenient for her. The art class wasn't anything special, just about 15 kids in the cafeteria working on seasonal crafts with Ms. Daniels, one of the teaching assistants. That day we were making some kind of tissue paper collage. I remember the cafeteria smelled like bleach and the leftover spaghetti they'd served at lunch. The janitor had pushed all the tables against the walls, and we were sitting in a circle on the floor with our supplies in the middle. I'd been working for maybe half an hour when I needed to use the bathroom. Ms. Daniels told me to hurry back and not to wander the halls. The bathrooms were just down the corridor, past a couple of classrooms and around a corner. The school was eerily quiet compared to how it was during the day. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, and I could hear the distant hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I made it to the corner where you turn right to reach the boys' bathroom. That's when I felt it. This weird sensation like when someone's staring at you. You know that feeling? The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't scared yet, just alert. I turned around to look back toward the hallway I'd just walked through. About 20 feet away was the doorway to Mrs. Harrison's classroom. The door was partially open, and there was someone standing in the doorway. This is where it gets difficult to explain. What I saw wasn't a person, at least not a normal one. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall at most. But it wasn't a kid. The proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long and skinny for its body, like someone had stretched them out. The fingers were extremely long too, like twigs or something. But the head, God, the head is what made my stomach drop. It was huge compared to the body, shaped like an egg standing on its narrow end. I couldn't see any hair, and the eyes. They were these massive black almond shapes tilted upward at the outer corners. I couldn't see a nose, just a slight bump where one should be. The mouth was just a slit, no lips. I froze. I'm not exaggerating when I say I couldn't move. I wasn't the kind of kid who got scared easily, but in that moment, I felt this primal terror. It wasn't like seeing a scary movie or hearing a ghost story. It was visceral, like my body knew I was in danger before my mind could process it. The thing didn't move at first. It just stood there, half hidden by the doorway, watching me. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Probably only seconds, but it felt like forever. Then its head tilted slightly, like it was curious. That small movement broke whatever spell had frozen me in place. I ran. I bolted for the bathroom, pushed through the door, and locked myself in a stall. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I was shaking, trying not to cry. I sat on the toilet with my feet up so nothing could see them under the stall door. I kept expecting the bathroom door to open, to hear something come in after me. But there was nothing, just the drip of a leaky faucet and the buzz of the lights. And here's where things get weird. I remember sitting in that stall terrified. Then, I'm walking back into the cafeteria. There's a gap. I don't remember leaving the bathroom. I don't remember walking back down the hall. I just remember suddenly being at the entrance to the cafeteria, feeling dazed and confused. Ms. Daniels asked if I was okay. Apparently, I looked pale. I sat down with the other kids and couldn't focus on my art project. After a few minutes, I whispered to Jason, who sat next to me, about what I'd seen. "Was it a gray?" he asked, like it was the most normal question. I had no idea what he was talking about. "A what?" "An alien. A gray alien." He grabbed a piece of paper and a marker and quickly sketched a figure. My blood went cold. It was exactly what I'd seen. The egg-shaped head, the huge black eyes, the skinny body. How did he know? Other kids overheard us and joined in. Tommy said his older brother had books about aliens and that what I described was definitely a gray. Sarah said they abducted people and did experiments on them. I'd never heard any of this before. We didn't have cable TV, and my parents were strict about what movies I watched. I'd never seen anything about aliens except maybe E.T., which looks nothing like what I saw. I felt sick. The other kids were excited, asking me questions I couldn't answer. Did it speak to me? Did I see a spaceship? Where did it go? I just kept shaking my head, wanting them to stop talking about it. When my mom picked me up, I didn't tell her. I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, or worse, that she'd think something was wrong with me. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those eyes in my mind. I remember getting up to check that my bedroom door was locked, something I'd never done before. The next day at school, I avoided that hallway. I took longer routes to get to classes. At recess, the kids who'd been in art class had spread the story, and now other students were coming up to me, asking about the alien I'd seen. Ms. Kennedy, my regular teacher, eventually heard about it and pulled me aside. She told me it was a nice story, but that I shouldn't scare the other children. She thought I'd made it up for attention. I tried to tell her I really saw something, but she just gave me that patronizing adult smile and told me to use my imagination for my creative writing assignment instead. I stopped talking about it after that, but I didn't stop thinking about it. I became obsessed with trying to understand what I'd seen. I started checking out books about UFOs and aliens from the library. I remember being shocked when I found a book with a drawing that looked exactly like what I'd seen in the hallway. How could I have seen something that matched descriptions other people had given if I'd never been exposed to those images before? The thing that's bothered me most over the years is that gap in my memory. I've tried so hard to remember what happened between sitting in the bathroom stall and walking back into the cafeteria. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses, a bright light, a humming sound, a feeling of floating. But I can't be sure if those are real memories or just things my mind has created after reading so many abduction stories. My parents eventually took me to a child psychologist when my fear of being alone and sudden insomnia didn't go away. I told her what happened, and she suggested that I'd probably seen a maintenance worker or a parent volunteer who my frightened mind had distorted. She said children often blend reality with things they've seen or heard, even if they don't consciously remember where they came from. But I know what I saw, and the fact that Jason could draw it exactly without me describing it in detail still freaks me out. How could he know? As I got older, people's reactions to my story fell into two camps. Most thought I'd imagined it or dreamed it, that I'd been influenced by TV shows or comics without realizing it. Others, usually those interested in paranormal stuff, were convinced I'd been abducted and had my memory wiped. They'd ask if I had any unexplained scars or recurring dreams. I don't, for what it's worth. I've never seen anything like that creature again. No UFO sightings, no missing time, except for those minutes in the school bathroom. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just a weird childhood thing, a random hallucination or misperception. But then I remember those eyes, the way it tilted its head, the absolute certainty I felt in that moment that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist in my world. And I know, whatever it was I saw that day at Julius Marks Elementary, it was real. I still can't walk down long, empty hallways without checking behind me 30 years later, and I'm still looking over my shoulder. Story 9. I've never been big on ghost stories or paranormal stuff. Honestly, I'm the type who needs proof, you know. I always figured there's a logical explanation for everything. But what happened to me last month in my girlfriend's grandmother's basement, I still can't explain it. I'm sharing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar, and maybe writing it down will help me process it. My girlfriend Emma and I were staying at her grandmother's house in Pinewood Hills for a weekend visit. It's this old house from the 70s with wood paneling everywhere, and that distinct smell old houses have. Not unpleasant, just distinct. Her grandmother insisted we take the basement guest room because it's cooler in the summer and has its own bathroom. The basement is finished, but definitely dated. Drop ceiling, old carpet, those rectangular fluorescent lights that flicker sometimes. There's a small TV down there that probably weighs 50 pounds and still has the built-in VHS player. The guest bed is against the far wall, underneath a tiny window that's about level with the driveway outside. We arrived on Friday night and spent most of Saturday with family. Emma's parents were staying at the house too, in the upstairs guest room. Nothing unusual happened that first night. We played cards with her grandma, watched some TV, normal family visit stuff. Saturday night, or I guess technically Sunday morning, Emma and I stayed up ridiculously late binge-watching some show on my laptop. Her family had gone to bed hours before. We finally crawled into bed around 6 in the morning, which was stupid because we knew everyone would be up early for breakfast before church. I remember checking my phone right before I closed my eyes, 6:12 a.m. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, but I was in that weird state where you're exhausted but your mind won't shut off. I could hear the house settling, the heating system clicking on and off, and occasionally cars passing on the street outside. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I remember was hearing voices upstairs. It was that muffled sound of people talking and moving around that filters through floors. I figured it was Emma's parents getting ready for the day. I didn't open my eyes, just listened and tried to will myself back to sleep. My phone was somewhere in the sheets, but I guessed it was probably around 8 or 9 in the morning. I was lying on my back, with Emma beside me facing the wall. I was in that half-asleep state where you're aware of your surroundings, but too tired to fully engage with them. You know that feeling when you're desperately trying to squeeze in a few more minutes of sleep before you have to get up? That's when I heard the door to the basement open at the top of the stairs. The sound is pretty distinctive. It has this slight squeak followed by the sound of it brushing against the carpet. I remember thinking, great, someone's coming to wake us up for breakfast. I kept my eyes closed, hoping whoever it was would see we were sleeping and leave us alone. I heard footsteps coming down the carpeted stairs, not heavy stomps, but definite steps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to make too much noise. Then I heard the door to our room open. It doesn't have a proper door handle, just one of those old glass knobs that makes a specific clinking sound when turned. I still didn't open my eyes, just laid there pretending to be asleep. The footsteps came into our room and stopped near the bed. I assumed it was Emma's mom coming to check if we were awake yet. The presence felt close, right next to the bed on my side. I still didn't want to fully wake up, but I cracked my eyes open just slightly. Just enough to see through my eyelashes without giving away that I was awake. What I saw made my stomach drop instantly. There was definitely someone, or something, standing beside the bed, but it wasn't Emma's mom. It was like a foggy outline of a woman, not fully solid. I could see the general shape, a head, shoulders, a torso, but it was like looking through frosted glass. There were no distinct facial features I could make out, just a grayish-white form. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light from the tiny basement window, or maybe my eyes were still adjusting to being open. I figured it had to be Emma's mom standing there, and my sleepy brain was just distorting what I was seeing. Then it moved. The figure leaned forward slightly, and I felt a light pressure on my shoulder, like someone gently trying to wake me. 2 small shakes, very gentle. I remember thinking, okay, it's definitely Emma's mom trying to wake me without startling me. But then something really strange happened. The figure didn't say anything. Not a word, not a whisper, nothing. In my experience, when someone's trying to wake you up, they usually say something like, "Time to get up," or call your name. This complete silence felt wrong somehow. I still wasn't fully awake, and I was stuck in that weird paralysis where your brain is registering things but your body doesn't want to respond. I kept my eyes barely cracked open watching. The figure moved again, this time down toward the foot of the bed. I felt the covers shift slightly, and then, this is the part that still makes my skin crawl, I felt a hand gently grab my foot through the blanket. It wasn't aggressive or threatening. It was almost like a massaging motion on my foot, like someone trying to gently rouse me. I remember letting out a small chuckle because it tickled a bit, but at the same time my breathing got heavier and faster. I wasn't consciously afraid. I still thought it was Emma's mom being weird, but my body was reacting like it knew something wasn't right. Acting purely on instinct, I twitched my foot away and thought, why would she grab my foot? That's weird. The touch stopped immediately. That small movement seemed to snap me into full wakefulness. I opened my eyes completely and sat up, ready to ask Emma's mom what she needed. There was nobody there. The room was completely empty except for Emma still sleeping beside me. I blinked hard a few times, rubbed my eyes, and looked around the room. Nothing. No one had just been standing there. No one had touched my shoulder or grabbed my foot. I felt this cold wave wash over me. I immediately reached over and shook Emma awake, probably more roughly than I intended to. "What? What's wrong?" she mumbled, clearly annoyed at being woken up. "Did you see anyone just now? Did someone come in the room?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled over and looked at me like I was crazy. "No, what are you talking about? I was asleep." "Did you feel the bed move just now? Did you hear anyone come in?" Emma sat up now, concerned by the tone of my voice. "No, I didn't feel or hear anything until you shook me. What's going on?" I explained what had just happened, the footsteps, the figure, the touch on my shoulder and foot. As I was talking, I realized how crazy it sounded. Emma looked skeptical, but could tell I was genuinely freaked out. "It was probably just a dream," she said, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Let's go upstairs and get some coffee." We got dressed quickly and headed upstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of Emma's parents or her grandmother. No coffee brewing, no breakfast being made, nothing. The kitchen was exactly as we'd left it the night before. Emma checked her phone and saw a text from her mom sent about an hour earlier. "Went to early service with Grandma, then running errands. Back around noon. Help yourself to breakfast." My stomach dropped. If her parents and grandmother had been gone, who had I heard moving around upstairs? Who had come down to our room? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it was just sleep paralysis, though I'd never experienced that before, but it had felt so real. The sounds, the presence, the touch. I even remembered the slight tickling sensation when my foot was grabbed. We made coffee and tried to distract ourselves with TV, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Around noon, Emma's parents and grandmother returned, carrying grocery bags and chatting about church. After helping put away the groceries, I decided to just ask directly. I tried to make it sound casual, even joking. "Hey, Susan," I said to Emma's mom, "did you come downstairs this morning to wake us up? I thought I felt someone grab my foot." The reaction I got wasn't what I expected. Her face went pale, and she nearly dropped the cereal box she was holding. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice suddenly tense. I repeated myself, explaining that I thought I'd heard someone come downstairs and enter our room around 8 or 9 in the morning, and that I'd felt someone touch my shoulder and then my foot. Susan glanced at Emma's grandmother, who had stopped putting away groceries and was staring at me with an odd expression. "I did check on you two this morning," Susan said slowly. "But I only opened the door after knocking. I heard voices from the TV, so I just reached in from the doorway to turn it off, then closed the door and left. I never went near the bed or touched you. The TV was still on from last night, right?" I felt a chill run through me. "No, we were watching on my laptop, and we shut it down before going to sleep. The TV wasn't on." There was an uncomfortable silence in the kitchen. Emma's grandmother cleared her throat. "This house has always had its quirks," she said quietly. Susan nodded. "I've heard things here before. Sometimes I hear someone call my name clear as day when I'm alone in the house. Once I heard Emma's dad calling me from upstairs when he wasn't even home." I looked at Emma, who seemed as unsettled as I felt. "Has anything like this happened to you?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No, but I've always slept with headphones on when I stay here. I don't like how quiet it gets at night." Later that day, I made a point of checking with my own grandparents, just to make sure everyone was okay. I had this irrational fear that maybe one of them had passed away and somehow, I don't know, visited me? But everyone was fine. It's been a month now, and I still can't explain what happened. Who or what was in that basement room with us? What tried to wake me by grabbing my foot? Why didn't it speak? I'm not saying it was definitely something supernatural. Maybe there's a perfectly logical explanation. But I know what I felt, what I saw, and the fact that Emma's mom confirmed she never touched me. I haven't been back to that house since, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Some things are better left unexplained, but this one keeps me up at night. I keep thinking about that gentle grip on my foot and wondering what would have happened if I hadn't pulled away. Story 10. I still don't know what to make of what happened last month. I've gone over it 100 times in my head, and it still doesn't make any sense. I'm not the type to believe in supernatural stuff, but this experience has seriously messed with my perception of reality. For context, I'd been recovering from heart surgery at my dad's place in this small woodland community about 20 miles outside of Portland. It's quiet out here, mostly retirees and families who want to be away from the city. The houses are pretty spread out, each with a decent amount of land. Dad's place backs up against a protected forest area, so we get all kinds of wildlife wandering through. I was about 6 weeks post-op when this happened. Dad had gone into town for groceries and to pick up my prescription refills, so I was alone except for Biscuit, my Yorkie. He's a tiny thing, barely 7 pounds, but thinks he's a Rottweiler. The recovery had been rough. Constant fatigue, limited mobility, and just feeling disconnected from my normal life. Before the surgery, I was always outdoors hiking or mountain biking, so being cooped up was driving me crazy. That afternoon, I was in the living room watching some mindless reality show on TV. The living room has these big sliding glass doors that lead out to a wooden deck Dad built a few years ago. It gives a nice view of the backyard and the woods beyond. I remember it was unseasonably warm for April, about 75 degrees, and I had the windows open to let in some fresh air. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the wooden deck. Not like an animal scurrying around, but deliberate heavy steps. Thunk, thunk, thunk. I muted the TV and listened more carefully. Biscuit's ears perked up too, and he jumped off my lap to stand at the glass door, tail wagging but not barking, which was weird for him. The footsteps stopped right at the door, and then I heard the sound of the door handle being jiggled. I froze. Dad wasn't due back for at least another hour, and we weren't expecting any visitors. The handle moved again, and then there was a distinct knocking sound. Not frantic, just 3 clear knocks. My heart was racing, which isn't great when you're recovering from cardiac surgery. I stood up slowly, grabbed my phone just in case, and approached the door cautiously. Biscuit was still standing there, but he wasn't barking or growling, just staring intently. When I got to the door, I looked down and saw a turtle. Not a small pond turtle, but a massive snapping turtle that had to be at least 15 inches across its shell. It was up on its hind legs with its front claws pressed against the glass, exactly where the knocking had come from. I stood there staring at it for a good 30 seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. We do get snapping turtles around here sometimes, but they usually stay near the creek that runs about 200 yards behind the property. I'd never seen one come up to the house before, let alone climb the 5 wooden steps to get onto the deck. As I watched, the turtle suddenly collapsed. It just fell over onto its back, its legs splayed out, and it looked like it had stopped breathing. I tapped on the glass, thinking maybe it would respond, but it didn't move at all. I called the local wildlife services, described the situation, and they basically told me that unless the turtle had visible injuries, I should just leave it alone. They said sometimes turtles play dead when they feel threatened, and it would probably right itself and leave once it felt safe. But something didn't feel right. The way it had deliberately come to the door, the knocking sound, and then just collapsing like that, it felt intentional somehow. I couldn't just leave it there, especially if it was dying. I filled a shallow bowl with water and carefully opened the sliding door just enough to slip outside. Biscuit tried to follow, but I pushed him back with my foot and closed the door. The turtle hadn't moved at all. Its eyes were closed, and I couldn't see any breathing movement. Not wanting to get too close, snapping turtles can be aggressive. I carefully poured some water over its shell and head. Almost immediately, the turtle's eyes blinked open. It started breathing again, these slow, deliberate breaths, and its legs began to move slightly. I backed away and watched as it struggled for a few moments before managing to flip itself over. Then it just sat there, looking at me. I know this sounds crazy, but I swear it was making eye contact with me, not in a random animal way, but with a focus and intelligence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I backed up to the door and went inside, watching through the glass as the turtle just sat there, staring at the door. About 10 minutes later, I was back on the couch when I heard the knocking again, 3 distinct knocks, just like before. I went back to the door, and sure enough, the turtle was back up on its hind legs, front claws against the glass. This time it didn't collapse when I approached, but it did seem to be moving sluggishly. I got more water and repeated the process. Again, the turtle seemed to revive somewhat after getting water. This pattern repeated 3 more times over the next hour. The turtle would knock, I'd give it water, it would seem better, then I'd go back inside only to hear knocking again a little while later. After the 5th time, I decided to try something different. I put a shallow pan of water on the deck near the turtle and went back inside. I watched through the glass as the turtle slowly made its way to the pan, drank some water and then just sat there. It seemed content, so I turned away to text my dad about the weird situation. When I looked back about 10 minutes later, the turtle was gone. The pan of water was still there, but no turtle. I opened the door and stepped out onto the deck, looking all around. Nothing. I went down the steps and checked under the deck, around the bushes near the house, even out into the yard a bit, no sign of the turtle anywhere. When my dad got home about 20 minutes later, I told him what happened. He helped me search the yard, but we found absolutely nothing. No turtle tracks in the soft dirt around the house, no sign of where it could have gone. The only evidence it had been there at all was some scratch marks on the wooden deck right in front of the door. Here's the thing that really freaks me out. That turtle was huge and old. Snapping turtles don't move fast on land, maybe a few feet per minute at best. In the 10 minutes I wasn't watching it, there's no way it could have made it more than 20 feet from the deck. But it was completely gone, like it had vanished into thin air. Dad suggested maybe a hawk or other predator took it, but there were no signs of a struggle, and honestly, that turtle was too big for most local predators to carry off. Plus, Biscuit would have gone crazy barking if there had been any commotion outside. The next day, I did some research on turtles in Native American folklore. Apparently, in some traditions, turtles are seen as messengers between worlds or carriers of healing energy. There are stories about spirit animals taking physical form to check on people or deliver messages. I know how this sounds. Before my surgery, I would have laughed at anyone suggesting something supernatural. But now I keep thinking about how that turtle seemed to deliberately come to find me, how it knocked on the door like a person would, how it made direct eye contact with me and then just disappeared without a trace. The weirdest part? My recovery took a dramatic turn for the better after that day. My energy levels improved, my incision healed faster than expected, and at my next checkup, my doctor was surprised by how well I was doing. He even said it was like I'd turned a corner in my recovery. I've told this story to a few close friends, and most of them think I was hallucinating from medication or just saw a regular turtle and my brain filled in the blanks with weird details. Maybe they're right. But the scratch marks are still there on the deck, exactly where I saw the turtle's claws. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I find myself looking out at that deck, half expecting to hear those footsteps and knocks again. Part of me hopes I do, just to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. But another part of me is terrified of what it might mean if that turtle really was something more than just an animal. I still don't have any logical explanation for what happened. How did a massive snapping turtle climb those steps? How did it know to knock on the door? Why did it keep coming back specifically when I was alone? And most importantly, where did it go in those 10 minutes when it completely vanished? All I know is that something inexplicable happened to me that day, and I haven't been able to look at the natural world the same way since. I keep wondering if there are forces or intelligences out there that we just don't understand yet, and what it means if they can reach out to us in such strange and specific ways. Story 11. I never thought I'd share this with anyone outside my family, but after seeing some of your stories, I feel like you guys might understand. This happened to me when I was a kid, and it still affects me today. When I was 8, my parents and I moved into this house in one of those cookie-cutter suburbs they were throwing up all over the outskirts of Las Vegas in the early 2000s. Everything was brand new, fresh paint, new carpets, that chemical smell that new houses have. I was super excited because as an only child, I got to pick my own bedroom out of 3 options. I immediately chose the biggest one next to my parents' room. It had this huge window that looked out over the desert, and I thought it was so cool to see the mountains in the distance. The first night, I set up all my stuffed animals on the bed and fell asleep feeling like a princess in my new castle. But that first night changed everything. I had this nightmare that I still remember vividly to this day. In the dream, I was lying in my new bed, but I wasn't alone. I could feel someone watching me from the corner of the room. When I looked, there was this dark shape of a person just standing there, staring. I couldn't move or scream. I was completely frozen. Then the figure started moving toward me, getting closer and closer until I could feel cold breath on my face. That's when I finally managed to wake up, screaming so loud my parents came running in. I told my mom I wanted to switch rooms the next morning. She thought I was being silly, but my dad got this weird look on his face. He's always been different. My mom calls him sensitive, but what she means is that he sees and feels things that other people don't. He told me changing rooms wouldn't solve the problem, that only I could. I had no idea what he meant at the time, but I insisted on switching anyway. My new room was smaller but cozy, with a window that faced our neighbor's house instead of the open desert. The first few nights were fine, and I started to think the nightmare had just been new house jitters. But about a week later, I woke up in the middle of the night with this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes and nearly wet myself when I saw a shadowy figure standing just outside my bedroom door. The hallway light was off, but I could see this dark silhouette perfectly outlined against the darkness. It was just standing there, watching me. I pulled the covers over my head and stayed that way until morning, too scared to even move. After that night, I started sleeping with the TV on, Disney movies all night. I'd position myself so I was facing away from the door, and I'd keep my nightlight on. Sometimes I'd even build a little fort with pillows around my head so I couldn't accidentally see anything if I woke up. But the nightmares got worse, way worse. I'd dream about being chased through our house by something I couldn't see, or I'd dream that I was lying in bed and something was slowly crawling up from the foot of my mattress. I'd wake up screaming and drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. After a particularly bad night where I dreamed that something was sitting on my chest and I couldn't breathe, my parents finally agreed to let me move to the 3rd bedroom. This one was tiny, basically a glorified closet that my mom had been using for storage, but I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep without being terrified, and it worked. For 7 years, I slept in that tiny room without a single nightmare or creepy feeling. I almost forgot about the whole thing as I grew up, got into high school, made friends, and lived a normal teenage life. I was 15, focused on boys and grades and all the regular stuff. Then the dreams started again. They were different this time. I kept dreaming about people hiding in forests, running from something. I'd be watching them, but then suddenly I'd become one of them, hiding behind trees, holding my breath as something searched for me. These dreams weren't as scary as my childhood nightmares, just unsettling. I mentioned them to my dad once, and he got that same weird look on his face that he'd had when I was 8. "Pay attention to them," was all he said. Then came the night that changed everything. I went to bed around 11 after finishing a history paper. I fell asleep quickly and started dreaming almost immediately. In this dream, I was lying in my bed, my actual bed, and I could feel something in the room with me. Then I felt a cold hand grab my ankle and start pulling me down toward the foot of the bed. I woke up with a gasp, heart racing, but I was actually sliding down my bed. I wasn't dreaming anymore, but I was still being pulled by something I couldn't see. I scrambled to grab onto my headboard, and that's when I saw him. An elderly Native American man was standing at the foot of my bed, his hand wrapped around my ankle. He looked solid, not transparent like ghosts in movies. He wore simple clothes, a worn leather vest over what looked like a linen shirt, and he had long gray hair in 2 braids. His face was deeply lined, and his eyes were so intense I couldn't look away. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. That's when I remembered what my dad had told me 7 years earlier. Changing rooms wouldn't solve the problem, only I could. In that moment, something clicked. I stopped struggling and looked directly at the man. With a voice that came out surprisingly steady, I said, "Let go of me, stop bothering me." His expression changed from anger to surprise. He released my ankle and stepped back, but he didn't disappear. He just stood there, watching me. I pulled my knees up to my chest and stared back at him, too afraid to look away in case he tried to grab me again. We stayed like that until morning, me huddled against my headboard, him standing silently at the foot of my bed. When the sun started coming through my window, he faded away, but I could still feel his presence in the room. This happened every night for a week. I'd go to bed, and he'd appear, just standing there watching me. I wasn't getting any sleep, and my parents noticed how exhausted I was. Finally, I broke down and told my dad what was happening. Instead of being freaked out like I expected, he nodded like this made perfect sense. "You need to ask him why he's here," he told me. "He's trying to tell you something." That night, when the man appeared again, I gathered all my courage. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling, he said, "This is my land. You don't belong here." I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, he wasn't wrong. This was probably his land long before our subdivision was built. The next day, I skipped school and went to the library to research if any Native American tribes had lived in our specific area. What I found was strange. According to all the historical records, no indigenous tribes had settled in our exact location for centuries. They had passed through, certainly, but not lived there. When I told my dad what the spirit had said and what I'd found in my research, he got quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I think he just wants acknowledgement, recognition that this was once his land, even if it wasn't his home." That night, when the man appeared, I tried something different. I sat up in bed and said, "I know this was your land before it was ours. I respect that. But this is my home now, and you're scaring me. If you want to stay here, you need to stop frightening me." My dad had taught me about boundaries with spirits, that they could remain as long as they didn't cause harm or fear. It was like setting ground rules for a roommate, just a really, really old one who happened to be dead. To my surprise, the man nodded. He moved to the corner of my room and sat down cross-legged on the floor. He stayed there all night, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. Over the next few months, we settled into a weird kind of coexistence. He would appear most nights, sometimes sitting in the corner, sometimes standing by my window, looking out at the desert. I started to notice other spirits too, a young woman who would pass through the hallway, a child who played in our backyard. My dad says my sensitivity increased after I acknowledged the first spirit. I'm 17 now, and I still see them. The old man is always around, watching over the house like it's still his responsibility to protect this patch of desert. I've learned to live with it, with them. Sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I'll talk to him. He rarely responds with words, but I can feel when he's listening. My friends think our house is creepy and refuse to stay overnight. My mom still pretends not to notice when something moves by itself or when rooms suddenly get cold for no reason. But my dad and I know the truth. We're not alone here, and we never have been. I don't know why the spirits chose to reveal themselves to me. I don't know why that old man grabbed my ankle that night after years of silence. All I know is that this land has memories longer than any of us can imagine. And sometimes those memories take form and remind us that we're just passing through a place that belonged to others long before us. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when we eventually move away. Will they follow us? Will they stay with the house? Or will they finally find peace? I still see him sometimes, standing at the foot of my bed, watching, but I'm not afraid anymore. This is his home too, after all. Story 12. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks. I'm not typically one to believe in the paranormal, but what happened to my girlfriend Julia last month has completely shaken my worldview. I'm still trying to process it, and honestly, I'm scared to even type this out because it makes it real. But I need answers, or at least to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special about it. We live in Willowdale, this cookie-cutter suburb where nothing ever happens. Julia and I had been living together for about 2 years in our small 2-bedroom house. It's not fancy, but it's ours, you know. We'd gone to bed around 11 that night after watching some stupid reality show. I remember it was raining lightly, and our cat Milo was curled up at the foot of the bed like he always does. Everything was normal, completely, boringly normal, until it wasn't. I woke up to Julia's scream. Not a full-on horror movie scream, but this sharp gasp of pain that jolted me awake instantly. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:22 a.m. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow from my phone charger. "Jules, what's wrong?" I mumbled, still half asleep. She was sitting straight up in bed, hand pressed against the side of her head. My head. "Fuck, it hurts," she hissed through clenched teeth. My first thought was that she was having one of her migraines. She gets them sometimes, especially when she's stressed at work. I reached over to turn on the lamp, and that's when I saw it. Blood. On her fingers. On the pillowcase. I was fully awake now, heart pounding. "Julia, you're bleeding." She pulled her hand away from her head, looking at her fingertips with confusion. What the hell? I leaned closer, pushing her hair back to see where the blood was coming from. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a long, deep scratch running from her right eyebrow up into her hairline. It wasn't just a little scrape. This was a proper wound, red and angry, with blood trickling down. "Oh my God," I whispered, grabbing tissues from the nightstand. "Hold this against it. What happened?" "I don't know," she said, voice shaking. I was asleep, and then suddenly it felt like something sliced across my head. We went to the bathroom where the light was better. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the scratch looked even worse. It was about 3 inches long, deep enough that it would definitely leave a mark. But that wasn't all. While I was cleaning the cut on her head, Julia noticed another scratch on her hand. This one ran from the base of her thumb across her wrist, thin but definitely there, like someone had taken a razor to her skin. The weird thing was, it had this strange skip in the middle, like when you cut something very quickly and the blade bounces off for a split second before continuing. "Amanda, what the fuck is happening?" Julia's voice cracked. I'd never seen her so scared. I was trying to stay calm, but inside I was freaking out. "Maybe you scratched yourself in your sleep? Let's check your nails." But her nails were short. She'd just cut them yesterday. They were smooth and dull, not sharp enough to cause those kinds of wounds. And there was no blood under them, not even traces that might have been wiped away. That's when Julia noticed something else. Her nose was bleeding slightly, just a small trickle from her right nostril. And as I looked more closely at her face, I saw these tiny marks in the middle of her forehead. 4 small dots in a row, almost like fingernail marks, like someone had pressed their nails into her skin. "There's another one," I said, my voice barely audible as I noticed a smaller scratch under her left eye with a couple of tiny marks beside it. We stood there in the bathroom, the fluorescent light humming above us, just staring at each other in the mirror. I think that was the moment we both realized something was very wrong. These weren't self-inflicted injuries. This wasn't some accident in her sleep. Could it have been you? Julia asked quietly, not accusingly, just searching for any logical explanation. I shook my head. I was sleeping on my side, facing away from you. Both my hands were under the pillows. I showed her my nails. They were longer than hers, but there was no blood on them, and I know I didn't do it. I was dead asleep until her gasp woke me. We went back to the bedroom, turning on all the lights. Milo was still curled up on my side of the bed, looking confused about all the commotion. He's the sweetest cat, never scratches, and he'd been sleeping nowhere near Julia's head anyway. We stripped the bed completely, checking for anything sharp that might have been in the sheets. Nothing. We looked at Julia's rings that she'd left on the nightstand. None of them were sharp or could have caused those kinds of cuts. We checked the headboard, the walls near the bed, everything. Nothing made sense. It was nearly 4 in the morning now, and we were both wide awake, sitting on our bare mattress surrounded by the sheets and blankets we'd pulled off. What if ... Julia hesitated, and I knew what she was thinking because I was thinking it too. What if it wasn't anything physical? I finished for her. The words hung in the air between us. I've never believed in ghosts or demons or any of that stuff. I'm the skeptic in our relationship. Julia's more open to it. She has this aunt who's into crystals and tarot and all that. But even she doesn't really buy into supernatural explanations for things. Yet here we were, sitting in our well-lit bedroom at 4 a.m., unable to explain the cuts that had appeared on her while she slept. Should we check the house? Julia asked. So that's what we did. We went room by room, turning on every light, opening every closet, looking behind every door. The front door was locked. We even checked the attic access in the hallway, untouched, with that layer of dust that forms when nobody's been up there for months. By this point, it was almost 5 in the morning. Outside, the sky was still dark, but with that hint of gray that comes before dawn. We made coffee because there was no way either of us was going back to sleep. We sat at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around our mugs, trying to make sense of what had happened. Maybe I did it to myself, Julia said eventually. Maybe I was having a nightmare and scratched myself without realizing. But we'd already ruled that out. Her nails were too short and dull, the cuts were too deep, too clean, and that weird skip in the scratch on her hand? How would that happen if she did it to herself? What about Milo? She suggested, but we both knew better. Our cat was declawed when we adopted him from the shelter. We wouldn't have done it ourselves, but the previous owners had, and he'd been sleeping peacefully the whole time. We sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the ticking of the clock on the wall and Milo's occasional purring as he rubbed against our legs. What if it happens again? Julia whispered, and I heard the fear in her voice. It was the same fear churning in my stomach. I didn't have an answer. We made it through the rest of that day in a haze. Both of us called in sick to work. Julia's cuts looked even worse in daylight. The one on her head had formed a nasty scab, and the others stood out angry and red against her pale skin. We took photos of everything, partly as evidence and partly because I think we both needed proof that we weren't imagining things. That night, neither of us wanted to go to bed. We stayed up watching mindless TV until our eyes couldn't stay open anymore. When we finally did go to our bedroom, I'd put fresh sheets on the bed and checked every inch of the room again. We left the bedside lamps on, and Milo stayed curled between us. Nothing happened that night, or the next, or the one after that. It's been a month now, and Julia's cuts have mostly healed. The one on her head left a faint scar that her hair covers. We've almost convinced ourselves that there must be some logical explanation we missed. Almost. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and find myself staring at Julia, watching her breathe, terrified that I'll see new cuts appearing on her skin. Sometimes when I'm home alone, I swear I feel something watching me from the corners of the room, and Julia says she keeps having dreams about hands reaching for her in the dark. We've looked into the history of our house. It's only 15 years old, built during a development boom in the early 2000s. No deaths, no tragedies we could find. We even went so far as to have a priest come bless the house, Julia's mom's idea. We bought sage and smudged every room, Julia's aunt's suggestion. The rational part of me wants to believe there's a simple explanation. Maybe there was something sharp in the bed we missed. Maybe Julia did scratch herself, and somehow the blood on her nails washed away when she touched her head wound. Maybe. But deep down, I know none of those explanations fit what happened. The cuts appeared while she slept. They woke her with the pain of their creation, and nothing in that room could have caused them. I still can't explain what happened that night. I don't know if I ever will. But I know what I saw and what I didn't see, and the space between those two things keeps me awake at night. If anyone has experienced something similar or has any insight, please let me know, because until I have answers every night when the lights go out, I can't help but wonder if it's going to happen again. Story 13. Ivy never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, typing this out makes the hair on my arms stand up. I'm 34 now, but this happened back in 2002 when I was 13. I've spent over 20 years trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation for what I saw that day, but I still haven't found one. I lived in Westfield back then. It was just a normal Tuesday in October. School had been boring as usual. Math test, cafeteria pizza that tasted like cardboard, gym class where I got hit in the face with a dodgeball. Nothing special. When the final bell rang, I headed out to catch my bus like I always did. I usually sat near the back with my friends, but that day I was super tired. I'd stayed up late the night before playing the new Tony Hawk game I'd just gotten, and I was completely wiped out. So I grabbed a seat by myself about halfway down the bus, right next to the window. I remember it was seat number 12. I always counted seats for some reason. The ride home took about 25 minutes, and we had to go down Elm Boulevard, which was always packed with traffic around 3:30. I remember leaning my head against the window, feeling the cool glass and the vibration of the bus as we drove. The sky was overcast, not quite raining but threatening to. You know that grayish light that makes everything look kind of flat and weird? It was like that. I was in that half-asleep state where you're not really thinking about anything, just watching cars pass by. Our bus was pretty high up compared to regular cars, so I could see down into them as we passed. I remember noticing stupid stuff like a guy picking his nose in a blue Honda and some lady singing along to something in her Camry. Just normal people doing normal things. That's when I saw it. We were stopped at a red light, and traffic was moving in the opposite direction. A small SUV passed by our bus. I'm pretty sure it was either a Honda CR-V or Toyota RAV4, dark green or maybe dark blue. At first glance, nothing special, but as it passed, something caught my eye and I sat up straight. There was no one in the driver's seat. I blinked hard, thinking I must be seeing things. The car was moving at a normal speed, keeping up with traffic, staying in its lane, but there was absolutely no one behind the wheel. I remember pressing my face closer to the glass, trying to see if maybe the driver was just really short or leaning down to pick something up off the floor. But I had a clear view into that car. The driver's seat was empty. Then I noticed something in the back seat that made my stomach drop. There was a woman sitting there, but not in any normal way. Her entire body was twisted around so she was facing directly toward my window, like completely turned, not just her head or shoulders. Her whole torso was rotated in a way that shouldn't be physically possible in a car seat. She was staring right at me. I'll never forget her face, or what should have been her face. It was blurry, like when you move while someone's taking your picture. Not just a little blurry, but like her features were smeared across her face. Her skin was this horrible pale color, almost bluish white, like nothing I'd ever seen on a living person. Her hair was jet black and long, hanging in messy strands around her face and shoulders. She was so thin, Not just skinny, but unnaturally thin, like her bones might snap if she moved too quickly. The worst part was that I got the distinct feeling she knew I was watching her. Even though I couldn't make out her eyes clearly, I felt her staring at me. It wasn't a random glance. She was fixated on me specifically. The entire sighting lasted maybe 5 seconds as our vehicles passed each other. Then the light changed, our bus started moving again, and the SUV was gone. I remember whipping my head around to try to see the car again through the back window, but it had already disappeared into traffic. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking and I felt ice cold all of a sudden. I looked around the bus to see if anyone else had noticed. Everyone was just doing their normal thing, talking, listening to music on their Discmans, sleeping. Nobody seemed freaked out. I wanted to say something, to point and shout, "Did you see that?" But I couldn't make my mouth work. It was like my voice was stuck somewhere deep in my chest. For the rest of the ride home, I kept my eyes glued to the window, scanning every car that passed, half afraid and half hoping I'd see the SUV again, but it never reappeared. When I got home, I immediately told my mom what I'd seen. She listened patiently, then suggested that maybe I'd dozed off and had a weird waking dream. I got mad and insisted I was completely awake, but looking back, I can understand why she didn't believe me. It sounds crazy, even now. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's blurred face. I kept thinking about the physics of it all. A car driving normally with no driver, a person twisted in a way human bodies don't bend. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe the driver was really small and I just couldn't see them, but I would have seen hands on the steering wheel at least. Maybe the car had one of those early autopilot systems, but this was 2002. Those didn't exist for regular cars yet, and nothing explained the woman in the back seat. Nothing explained how she could turn her entire upper body like that, or why her face looked the way it did. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I was tired, the light was weird, my brain played a trick on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I started paying extra attention on the bus rides after that. I'd scan every green SUV we passed, looking for the empty driver's seat, looking for the woman. I never saw anything unusual again. After a few weeks, I stopped looking so hard. After a few months, I only thought about it occasionally, but I've never forgotten. Years later, when I was in college, I took a psychology class where we learned about sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations, those weird things you can see when you're between sleeping and waking. I tried to convince myself that's what had happened. I had dozed off on the bus and my brain created this bizarre image, but that doesn't feel right. I was tired, yeah, but I wasn't sleeping. I remember the specific cars that passed before and after the SUV. I remember the exact spot on Elm Boulevard where it happened, right by the Mobil gas station with the broken price sign. I've also wondered if it could have been some kind of prank or art project. Maybe someone rigged a car with remote controls and put a creepy mannequin in the back seat. But that seems far-fetched, especially for 2002. And why would anyone go to all that trouble just to freak out random people on a school bus? The thing that scares me most is that I don't think the woman I saw was human. Not entirely anyway. There was something fundamentally wrong about her, beyond just the impossible positioning and the blurred face. Something in the way she looked at me felt ancient and cold and hungry, like I was being sized up by something that only looked partially human. I'm a pretty rational person. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that. But what I saw that day doesn't fit into my understanding of how the world works. It's like a puzzle piece from the wrong box. It doesn't belong in reality as I know it. I've gone through periods where I've obsessed over this memory, researching similar experiences online, looking up supernatural phenomena in Westfield, even driving back to that stretch of road years later just to see if I could make sense of it. Nothing has helped explain what I saw. The memory has faded a bit over time, like memories do. But certain details remain crystal clear. The empty driver's seat, the woman's impossible posture, the blur where her face should have been, the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. I still take that road sometimes when I visit my parents. Every time I drive past that spot by the gas station, I get this cold feeling in my stomach. I can't help checking the cars around me, looking for empty driver's seats, looking for faces that don't quite make sense. I haven't seen anything strange since that day. No other paranormal experiences, no other glimpses into whatever exists alongside our normal world. Just that one moment when I was 13, tired from staying up too late playing video games, looking out a school bus window on a grey October afternoon. Sometimes I almost convince myself it never happened, but then I'll be falling asleep and I'll suddenly remember the exact shade of that woman's pale skin, or the way her body twisted in a way no spine should bend, and I'll be wide awake again, heart pounding, wondering what exactly passed by me on Elm Boulevard all those years ago, and if it's still out there, driving around with nobody behind the wheel. Story 14. I've never been brave enough to share this before. I'm still not sure if putting this out there will make things better or worse, but I need to tell someone who might understand. Maybe someone has experienced something similar. I've always felt different, though I couldn't articulate why as a kid. Growing up in Willow Creek, everything seemed normal on the surface. Typical small town where everyone knows everyone, where my mom worked at the local hospital and dad at the hardware store. But from my earliest memories, I sensed things others didn't. It started when I was around 4. I remember playing in our living room when suddenly everything felt wrong. The room didn't change physically, but colors seemed to drain away, leaving everything gray and cold. I started crying uncontrollably. Mom rushed in asking what happened, but I couldn't explain. How do you tell someone the world just changed when nothing actually moved? This happened regularly. I'd be fine 1 minute, then overwhelmed the next. My parents thought I was just sensitive or having mood swings. The worst part was nighttime. God, I hated the dark. Not like other kids who were afraid of monsters under the bed. This was different. I felt watched. I begged my parents to leave lights on, which worked until I was 7, and Dad decided I was too old for night lights. I spent countless nights with blankets pulled over my head, trying not to breathe too loudly, convinced something would hear me if I did. The first time I saw something, really saw something, I was 8. I woke up around 3 in the morning needing to pee. When I sat up, I noticed someone standing by my wardrobe. It was Mom, holding a laundry basket, just staring at me. I remember feeling relieved at first. "Mom," I whispered, "what are you doing?" She didn't answer, just kept staring, breathing slowly, rhythmically. Something felt off about how she stood, too still, like a photograph, and her eyes, they followed me, but didn't seem to see me. "Mom?" I tried again, louder. Nothing, just that slow breathing. I dove under my covers, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I stayed there until morning light filtered through my blanket. When I finally emerged, no one was there. At breakfast, I asked Mom why she was in my room with laundry in the middle of the night. She looked confused. "What are you talking about? I was asleep." "But I saw you," I insisted. "You were holding a basket." Dad laughed it off. "You were dreaming, kiddo." But Mom looked troubled. "I wasn't sleepwalking, if that's what you're thinking. I've never sleepwalked in my life." I knew what I saw wasn't a dream. Dreams fade. This memory remained razor sharp. Throughout elementary school, I tried to be normal, despite the constant feeling of something hovering at the edge of my vision. I made friends, joined soccer, did all the things kids do. But I always felt like I was performing normalcy rather than living it. When I was 12, we moved to a different house across town. I hoped the weird experiences would stay behind. They didn't. The first night in our new place, I woke up feeling like someone was sitting on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just lay there as pressure increased. When it finally released, I gasped for air like I'd been underwater. The next morning, I found 3 spiders on my pillow, dead, perfectly arranged in a triangle. Spiders became a constant every morning, at least one in my room, sometimes alive, sometimes dead, always near my bed or personal belongings. Mom cleaned thoroughly, checked for nests, even called an exterminator who found nothing unusual, yet they kept appearing, only in my space, never my parents' room or other areas of the house. By high school, I'd developed a reputation as the weird girl. I tried to hide it, but sometimes I'd just know things I shouldn't, like when my friend Jessie's grandmother died. I knew before she got the call. I felt sick all morning, kept seeing an old woman's face I'd never met. When Jessie's phone rang during lunch and she broke down crying after hearing the news, I wasn't surprised. I just hugged her while fighting back my own tears for a woman I'd never known. The scariest incident happened when I was 16. I've always been a light sleepwalker according to my parents. Nothing serious, just occasionally wandering to the kitchen or bathroom. I never remembered these episodes, but this was different. That night I was aware, but not in control. It felt like being pushed to the back of my own mind, still conscious but watching from behind my eyes as my body moved without my permission. I got out of bed and walked to the alarm panel near my parents' room. My hands punched in the code to disable it, something I didn't even know how to do consciously. Then I walked downstairs, unlocked the deadbolt and security door, and opened our front door wide. All the lights stayed on as I did this. Then everything went black. I woke to my mom screaming from downstairs. "Why is the front door wide open? Miranda!" I was back in my bed, confused and terrified. The security system was off. The doors were unlocked and open, but I had no memory of returning to bed. Mom came upstairs, furious and scared. "Did you go outside last night? The alarm's off and the front door was wide open." I tried explaining that I didn't remember doing it, which only made her more upset. Dad suggested I might have sleepwalked, but even he looked concerned when Mom pointed out I'd somehow disabled the security system, something I genuinely didn't know how to do. That night I found 7 spiders arranged in a circle around my pillow. College should have been my escape. I moved 300 miles away to a dorm, hoping distance would sever whatever connection existed between me and these experiences. For a few weeks, things seemed normal. Then my roommate started complaining about spiders in our room, specifically on my side. "It's like they're following you," she joked, not knowing how her words chilled me. She requested a room change after 2 months. I didn't blame her. Through 4 years of college, 3 apartments, and now my current house, the pattern remains consistent. I am always the only person who finds spiders in my personal space. I've tried everything. Professional exterminators, sealing every crack, special repellents. Nothing works. It's like they're drawn to me specifically. The predictive episodes have gotten stronger too. Last year, I avoided taking my usual route to work because I kept seeing flashing lights and broken glass in my mind. That afternoon, there was a 5-car pileup exactly where I would have been. 3 people died. My mom's gotten into spirituality over the past few years. Crystals, tarot cards, that kind of thing. When I finally broke down and told her everything, she wasn't surprised. "You've always had something special," she said, "but you keep rejecting it." "Special?" I laughed bitterly. "There's nothing special about being terrorized by whatever this is." She shook her head. "It's trying to communicate with you, and you keep shutting it out. That's why it's escalating." I don't know if she's right. Part of me wants to believe there's some purpose to all this, that I'm not just losing my mind, but another part is terrified of acknowledging whatever presence has shadowed me my entire life. 2 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning. My room was ice cold, despite the summer heat. At the foot of my bed stood a woman who looked exactly like me, down to the birthmark on my collarbone. She was staring with hollow eyes, holding something in her cupped hands. "What do you want?" I whispered. She opened her hands. Dozens of tiny spiders spilled out, scattering across my bed. I screamed and jumped up, turning on every light I could reach. When I looked back, she was gone. So were the spiders. No trace they'd ever been there. I haven't slept properly since. I'm writing this now at 4 in the morning because I'm afraid to close my eyes. Something about this last encounter feels different, like a warning or invitation. I don't know which is worse. I've tried therapy, I've tried medication, I've tried moving, praying, ignoring it, confronting it, nothing changes. These experiences have shaped my entire life, who I befriend, where I live, what I do. I'm 32 and have never had a relationship last longer than 6 months, because how do you explain to someone that you might wake up screaming, or know when their relative is about to die, or why your bedroom is constantly filled with spiders no matter how clean you keep it? I'm not writing this for sympathy or solutions. I just need to know if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Is there something wrong with me? Am I actually receptive to some kind of energy like my mom suggests? Or is this all elaborate hallucinations from a broken brain? The figure that looks like me has appeared 3 more times since I started writing this. She's standing in the corner now, watching me type. Her mouth is moving, but I can't hear what she's saying. The spiders are back too, crawling up the walls in perfect vertical lines. I'm not even scared anymore, just tired. If you've read this far and have any insight, please share it. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Story 15. I've never told anyone outside my immediate family about this. I'm still not sure I should share it now, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened to me. I grew up in Pinewood, a small town where nothing exciting ever happens. At least that's what everyone thinks. I know different. I was 10 years old when I first noticed it. I was playing in my backyard on a summer afternoon. The sun was starting to set, and I remember the way the shadows stretched across the grass. That's when I felt it, this weird sensation like someone was watching me. I turned around expecting to see one of my friends or maybe my mom, but there was nothing there, just this empty space that somehow felt occupied. I brushed it off. Kids have active imaginations, right? But over the next few weeks, it kept happening. I'd be doing homework in my bedroom and catch movement out of the corner of my eye. When I'd turn to look, I'd see what looked like a hand quickly pulling back around the doorframe. Or I'd be brushing my teeth and in the mirror, I'd see something dark move behind the shower curtain, but when I'd check, nothing was there. The first time I actually saw it clearly, I was 11. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I saw it at the end of the corridor, a tall, dark figure wearing what looked like a cloak or a robe. It had no face, just this black void where a face should be. It reminded me exactly of those ring wraiths from Lord of the Rings, which I'd watched with my older cousin against my parents' wishes. I froze in place, unable to move or scream. After what felt like forever, I blinked, and it was gone. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers until morning. I tried telling my parents, but they just said it was a nightmare or my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. Throughout elementary school, the sightings were rare, maybe once every couple of months. But when I hit 13, things got worse. I was going through a tough time. Middle school sucks for everyone, but I was dealing with some pretty severe depression that nobody recognized at the time. That's when the entity, that's what I started calling it in my head, began appearing more frequently. It would be in my room at night, standing in the corner. I'd wake up and it would be there, just watching. Sometimes I'd see it during the day too, always at a distance, always just for a second before disappearing. My parents moved us to a different house when I was 15, thinking a change of scenery might help with my attitude problems. I remember feeling relieved, thinking maybe the entity was attached to our old house. But the first night in the new place, I woke up around 3 in the morning and there it was, standing at the foot of my bed. It had followed me. The worst part was, I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I tried once, with a school counselor, but the way she looked at me made it clear she thought I was either making it up or needed serious psychiatric help. So I just learned to live with it. I'd ignore it when it appeared, pretend I didn't see it lurking in dark corners or standing in doorways. By the time I graduated high school, I was so used to its presence that it almost became normal. Almost. I never got over the chill that ran down my spine whenever I caught sight of it, or the way my heart would race when I felt it watching me. I chose to attend a Christian university 400 miles away from Pinewood. Part of me hoped that putting some distance between me and my hometown might leave the entity behind. Plus, I thought maybe being in a religious environment might offer some protection. I was wrong on both counts. The entity followed me to college. My roommate never saw it, but sometimes he'd comment on cold spots in our dorm room or how he felt uneasy in certain areas. I knew why, but I never told him. College was better for me overall, though. I made friends, found subjects I was passionate about, and my depression improved. During this time, the sightings became less frequent. Sometimes I'd go weeks without seeing the entity, and I started to hope that maybe it was losing interest in me. After graduation, I moved back to my home state, but not to Pinewood. I got an apartment in the city about an hour away and started my career. That's where I met Eliza. She was funny, smart, and saw the world in this amazing, positive way that I'd never been able to. We hit it off immediately, and within a year we were living together. I never told Eliza about the entity. How could I? By the way, I've been stalked by some kind of supernatural shadow figure since I was a kid. Isn't exactly great relationship conversation. For the first 6 months we lived together, I didn't see the entity at all. I started to believe that maybe Eliza's presence somehow kept it away, or that I'd finally outgrown whatever psychological issue had been causing the hallucinations, because that's what I'd convinced myself they were. Then came the dream, the only dream I ever had about the entity in all these years. In the dream, I was sitting in our living room when the cloaked figure appeared right in front of me. Usually it kept its distance, but now it was close enough that I could have reached out and touched it, not that I would have. It didn't speak, it never did, but somehow I understood what it was communicating to me. It was showing me how it planned to kill me. The entity showed me visions of itself appearing differently to different people in my life. To Eliza, it would look like me, asking her to let me in when I was supposedly locked out. To my parents, it would appear as a stranger needing help. To my friends, it would look like someone they trusted, and once it had isolated each of them, I can't even describe what I saw it doing to them in the dream, but I knew that after it hurt everyone I loved, it was coming for me last. I woke up gasping for air, covered in sweat. Our dog, Cooper, was standing at the foot of the bed, hackles raised, growling at the empty corner of the bedroom. I didn't need to look to know the entity was there. I could feel it. Eliza stirred beside me, asking what was wrong. I told her I'd had a nightmare, but that everything was fine. She seemed to accept this and rolled over to go back to sleep. That's when Cooper started barking aggressively at the corner. Eliza sat up and looked where the dog was barking. I followed her gaze, and there it was, the cloaked figure, more solid and clear than I'd ever seen it before. My blood ran cold, not because the entity was there, I was used to that, but because Eliza was looking right at it. In all these years, no one else had ever seen it. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, clutching my arm. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. After 18 years of being the only one who could see this thing, someone else was finally witnessing it too. The entity didn't move, it just stood there. The empty space where its face should be turned toward us. Then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed at me. Eliza screamed. Not a short scream of surprise, but a long, horrified wail that made Cooper start howling. She was staring at my face with this look of absolute terror. "Your face," she kept saying. "Your face." I jumped up and ran to the bathroom, flipping on the light. In the mirror, my face looked normal to me. No blood, no marks. Nothing out of the ordinary. When I came back to the bedroom, the entity was gone, and Eliza was huddled against the headboard, shaking. "What did you see?" I asked her. "Black marks," she said, her voice trembling, "like ticks or tallies. They were all over your face, spreading while I watched, and that thing was pointing at you like it was counting." We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We kept all the lights on and sat together on the couch with Cooper between us. I finally told Eliza everything, about seeing the entity since I was a child, how it had followed me everywhere, about the dream I'd just had. Instead of thinking I was crazy, she believed me. She'd seen it too. The next day, we went to my parents' house and told them everything. To my surprise, my mom confessed that when I was a baby, she sometimes felt a presence in my nursery. She'd check on me and feel like someone else had just been there. She'd dismissed it as new mom anxiety, but now she wasn't so sure. That was 6 years ago. Eliza and I are married now, with a little girl of our own. The entity appears much less frequently these days, maybe once or twice a year and only for brief moments. We've tried everything from religious cleansings to psychic consultations, but nothing has completely banished it. I still don't know what it is or why it chose me. Sometimes I wonder if it's some kind of guardian, watching over me rather than stalking me. Other times, especially when I remember that dream and the tally marks Eliza saw, I'm certain it's counting down to something. Our daughter is 3 now, and sometimes she talks about the shadow person who stands in her doorway at night. Every time she mentions it, my blood turns to ice. I check her face constantly for any signs of those black marks Eliza described. Whatever this thing is, I've accepted that it might be with me for life, but I will do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't follow my daughter the way it followed me. Story 16. I've been hesitating to share this for years because I know how it sounds. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff. I'm actually pretty skeptical about most things. But what happened to me on the USS Lexington when I was 12 is something I still can't explain, and it's been 15 years now. I grew up in Corpus Christi, and the Blue Ghost, that's what everyone calls the USS Lexington, was basically my second home. My dad volunteered there sometimes, and I was obsessed with World War II history and naval battles. I knew every inch of that carrier from all the times we'd visited. I could tell you about every plane, every gun placement, even random trivia about how many eggs they'd cook for breakfast when she was in service. Total history nerd stuff. When my Boy Scout troop arranged an overnight stay on the ship, I was beyond excited. Most kids would have been thrilled just for the sleepover adventure, but for me, it was like getting to spend the night in my favorite museum. We were supposed to sleep in these little bunks just like the sailors did back in the day. How cool is that? We arrived around 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday in August. It was hot as hell outside, and the metal of the ship was baking in the sun. The regular tourists were starting to leave as our group got our orientation in the hangar bay. The scout leader went through all the rules. Stay together, don't touch exhibits without permission, no running, all that stuff. I barely listened because I'd heard it all before. After dinner, nothing special, just pizza they brought in. Most of the other kids wanted to check out the aircraft displays, but my dad suggested we go up to the flight deck since it would be cooling down outside now that the sun was setting. I jumped at the chance. The flight deck at sunset was my favorite spot on the whole ship. We took the stairs up, and when we pushed through the heavy door onto the deck, the sky was this incredible mix of orange and purple. The bay was calm, with just a light breeze coming off the water. A few other families from our group were up there too, but they were mostly at the far end, taking pictures of the sunset over the water. My dad and I walked along the deck, him pointing out different spots where planes would have been secured or launched. I'd heard his explanations dozens of times, but never got tired of it. He was telling me about how pilots had to time their takeoffs with the ship's pitch in rough seas when something changed. It started with this weird pressure in my ears, like when you're driving up a mountain or diving deep in a pool. At first, I thought maybe a storm was rolling in suddenly, but the sky was still clear. Then my heart started pounding hard. Not like I was scared, but like I'd just sprinted up all the stairs without stopping. My skin got clammy and cold despite the August heat. "You okay, Ben?" my dad asked, but his voice sounded muffled and far away, like he was talking to me through a wall. I tried to answer, but before I could, the whole world around me shifted. It wasn't gradual. 1 second I was standing on the quiet museum-like deck of the Lexington in the present day, and the next second I was somewhere else. Except I was still on the Lexington, just not my Lexington. The deck was suddenly crowded with men in old-style Navy uniforms, not the clean, pressed ones you see in the museum displays, but worn, dirty ones. They were running, shouting, moving with purpose and panic. The peaceful sunset was gone, replaced by a hazy sky filled with black smoke. The ship wasn't still anymore. I could feel it moving, cutting through water. The noise hit me like a physical wall. Sirens wailed, not modern ones, but this deep, mechanical blaring that seemed to vibrate through the metal deck. Men shouted commands I couldn't understand over the chaos. Someone screamed in pain somewhere I couldn't see. There was the constant background thundering of what I immediately recognized as the ship's anti-aircraft guns firing, a sound I'd only ever heard in documentaries. Then came the worst sound, planes. Not the distant commercial jets you sometimes hear passing over the museum, but the distinctive high-pitched whine of World War II fighter engines, close and threatening. I heard explosions, felt the ship shudder beneath my feet. Water splashed up over the side of the deck nearby, soaking several sailors who didn't even seem to notice as they struggled to move something heavy across the deck. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what was happening. I stood frozen, hunched down instinctively as if making myself smaller would somehow protect me from whatever was happening. A sailor ran past me so close his shoulder should have knocked into mine, but he passed through like I wasn't there. That's when true panic set in. "Dad?" I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the chaos. I couldn't see him anymore. All I could see were these men, some barely older than teenagers, fighting for their lives in what I realized must be an actual battle. About 20 feet away, something exploded on the deck. Men were thrown backward, their bodies limp. Others ran toward them with fire extinguishers and medical bags. The smell hit me then. Burning fuel, hot metal, gunpowder, and something worse I didn't want to identify. I ran. I just ran. I didn't know what else to do. I sprinted across the flight deck, weaving around men who couldn't see me, past equipment that wasn't there in my time. I reached a door, not the one I'd come through with my dad, but another one that looked like it might lead inside the ship. I yanked it open and dove through. I found myself in a narrow corridor I didn't recognize. This wasn't part of the regular tour route. I knew that immediately. The lights were dim, emergency red instead of normal white. I could still hear the battle raging outside, but it was muffled now. Men rushed past me in the corridor, some carrying ammunition, others helping wounded sailors. Panic completely took over. I ran down the corridor, turned a corner, and saw a stairwell. I practically threw myself down it, just wanting to get away, to find something familiar. I ended up in what I realized was an access way to the hangar bay. I pushed through another door, and it stopped. All of it, just like that. I was standing in the normal, quiet, present-day hangar bay of the USS Lexington. The planes were all in their display positions. The lighting was normal. There were a few other scout families walking around, looking at exhibits. No battle, no sailors, no explosions or sirens or gunfire, and there was my dad, running toward me with the most terrified look I've ever seen on his face. "Ben, what the hell happened? Where did you go?" He grabbed my shoulders, checking me over like he expected to find injuries. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My clothes were soaked with sweat, but I felt ice cold. I couldn't find words at first. I was just with you, on the deck," I finally managed to say. "No, you weren't. One second you were standing next to me looking at the sunset. Then you got this weird look on your face and took off running. I've been looking for you for almost 10 minutes. The scout leader was about to call security. 10 minutes? It had felt like both seconds and hours at the same time. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out jumbled and made no sense. My dad thought I'd had some kind of panic attack or maybe heat exhaustion. Even though it wasn't that hot anymore, he took me to sit down, got me some water, and made me rest. Later that night, when we were supposed to be sleeping in those sailor bunks with the rest of the troop, I was still wide awake, staring at the metal above me. I whispered what happened to my dad in more detail. He listened, didn't interrupt, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You know," he finally said, "the Lexington that's here in Corpus isn't the original one. The first USS Lexington was sunk in the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942. I knew that, of course. The ship we were on was the second Lexington, commissioned later in the war. But this one saw plenty of combat too," he continued. "Kamikazes hit her several times. A lot of men died defending this ship. I couldn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those sailors running, heard those explosions. The next morning before we left, I asked one of the museum staff about the door I'd gone through, the one that wasn't on the tour route. She looked confused and told me all doors that weren't part of the tour were kept locked. I've gone back to the Lexington many times since then. I even volunteered as a guide during high school. I've walked that flight deck in all kinds of weather, at all times of day. I've stood in the exact spot where it happened. Nothing like that has ever happened again. I've researched the ship's history extensively, looking at battle reports, crew accounts, everything I could find. Some of the details I remember, the sounds, the specific equipment on deck, match perfectly with accounts from sailors who served during major battles in the Pacific. But what I experienced wasn't just remembering history I'd read about. I was there. I smelled it. I felt the ship moving. I saw men dying. I still don't know what happened to me that evening. Was it some kind of hallucination, a vivid waking dream, or did I somehow slip through time for those few minutes and witness something that happened decades before I was born? The only thing I know for certain is that for 10 minutes on a summer evening when I was 12 years old, I experienced the true horror of what those men went through on that ship. And 15 years later, I still wake up sometimes with the sound of those sirens in my ears and the smell of burning fuel in my nose. Damned. Story 17. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I used to watch those ghost hunting shows and laugh at them with my mates. We'd make fun of people jumping at every little creak or dust particle on camera. I thought it was all bullshit, to be honest. Just people with overactive imaginations or looking for attention. That was before I moved back to Scotland. I'd spent 6 years living in Spain, mostly in remote mountain properties where you'd hear all sorts of noises at night. Wild boars rustling through the undergrowth, wind howling through the valleys, old houses settling. None of it ever bothered me. I slept like a baby through thunderstorms that shook the walls. When I decided to come back home at 31, I needed a place to stay while getting back on my feet. My good friend Simon suggested the annex at his mum's place, a granny flat as we call them here. It was perfect. My own space with a separate entrance, but affordable. The main house had been sitting empty for about 6 months since Simon's mum, Elaine, had moved to be closer to her sister, though she still owned the property and visited occasionally. The annex was connected to the main house by a porch and a vestibule, but it felt private enough. The property itself was pretty isolated, about 20 minutes outside of Inverness, surrounded by fields and a small wooded area behind the house. Beautiful, peaceful, exactly what I wanted after years of Spanish heat. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days reconnecting with old friends, job hunting, and getting used to the Scottish weather again. The nights were quiet, just the sound of rain on the roof and occasional gusts of wind. It was a Monday night when it happened. I remember because I'd had an interview that day and was feeling optimistic about my chances. I'd stayed up late watching a football match replay, and it was well after midnight when I decided to call it a night. As I was turning off lights in my part of the house, I noticed a glow coming from the main house. I distinctly remember thinking, "That's weird. I didn't leave any lights on in there." I'd been in earlier to grab some extra blankets Elaine had said I could use. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to just leave it until morning, but my practical side won out. Electricity bills aren't cheap, and I didn't want to waste Elaine's money. So I unlocked the connecting door and stepped into the vestibule. The light was coming from the hallway that ran the length of the main house. As I walked toward it, the floorboards creaked under my feet, an ordinary sound that suddenly seemed too loud in the empty house. The air felt different inside the main building, colder, heavier somehow. I remember rubbing my arms against a sudden chill. When I reached the hallway, I saw the light was coming from one of the bedrooms at the far end. I started walking toward it, and that's when I saw it. It was just for a second, but I'm certain of what I saw. A shadow, small and quick, darted across the hallway about 15 feet in front of me. It was the size of a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and it moved with purpose, disappearing into one of the bedrooms on the right. I froze. My brain tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, maybe even a small animal that had somehow gotten in. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations made sense. What I'd seen had a distinctly human shape, a child's shape. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and muffled in the empty house. No response. I should have just turned around and left. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, I took a few more steps forward, drawn by some mixture of curiosity and disbelief. The bedroom door where the shadow had disappeared was partially open. As I approached, the temperature seemed to drop even further. I could see my breath now, little clouds of vapor with each exhale. It was March in Scotland, so cold wasn't unusual, but this was different. This was like walking into a freezer. I reached for the light switch in the hallway, flicked it on. The sudden brightness made me blink, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The bedroom door was still ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. I stood there for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, hand outstretched toward the door, unable to make myself push it open. Then I heard it, a soft sound from inside the room. Not a voice, not footsteps, but a sort of rustling like someone shifting position. That broke my paralysis. I backed away, then turned and practically ran back through the house, through the vestibule, into my annex. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then shoved a chair against it for good measure. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, telling myself I'd imagined it, that old houses made strange noises, that shadows played tricks on your eyes. But I couldn't shake the image of that small, darting shape, or the absolute certainty that I'd seen something that shouldn't have been there. The next morning, I called Simon and casually asked if his mum had mentioned anything unusual about the house. He said no, not that he could recall, but suggested I talk to Elaine directly since she was coming by that weekend to check on the property. For the rest of the week, I avoided going into the main house after dark. I'd go in during daylight hours if I needed something, but even then, I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. Several times I thought I heard footsteps from upstairs when I was in the kitchen, or the sound of a door closing when I knew I was alone. Saturday came, and Elaine arrived around noon. She's a lovely woman in her 60s, practical and down to earth. We had tea in my annex, catching up, and I was trying to figure out how to bring up what I'd seen without sounding like I'd lost my mind. Finally, I just decided to be direct. "Elaine, has anything strange ever happened in the main house?" She paused mid-sip, looking at me over her teacup with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What do you mean by strange, dear?" I hesitated, then told her about the light being on, about seeing what looked like a child's shadow in the hallway. As I spoke, her face changed, not to disbelief or concern, but to something like resignation. When I finished, she set down her cup with a sigh. "So you've seen him too?" My stomach dropped. "Him?" She nodded. "The wee boy. He's been in that house as long as I've owned it, 23 years now." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You've seen him?" "More times than I can count," she said. "Usually just glimpses like you described, running down the hallway or peeking around doorways. Sometimes I'd hear him laughing or crying." She went on to tell me that she wasn't the only one. Her late husband had seen the boy too, as had Simon when he was younger, though he pretended not to remember now. But that wasn't all. "There's another one," she said quietly. "A man, tall and thin, always at the far end of the house near the sitting room. I've only seen him a handful of times, but when I do," she shuddered. "He doesn't feel like the boy. The boy seems lost, confused maybe. The man feels angry." I asked her why she'd never mentioned this before I moved in. She looked embarrassed. "I thought maybe they'd gone. It had been quiet for so long, and they don't usually bother the annex. And honestly, I was afraid you wouldn't take the place if I told you. It's not easy finding tenants for such a remote location." She then told me something that made my blood run cold. About 5 years ago, when things had been particularly active, she'd hired someone, a spiritual cleanser, she called him, to come and try to rid the house of whatever was there. The man had gone through the house burning sage and reciting prayers. Everything seemed to be going fine, Elaine said, until he reached the sitting room at the back of the house. He was saying his prayers, waving his sage bundle, when suddenly, this sounds mad, but I swear it's true, the bundle just blew up in his face, burst into flames much bigger than it should have, singed his eyebrows clean off. The man had dropped everything and run from the house. When Elaine called him later, he refused to come back, refused to even talk about what had happened. That's not even the strangest part, she continued, lowering her voice though there was no one else to hear us. It's the field behind the house. Things happen there that I can't explain. Animals disappearing or turning up dead with no marks on them. My garden would never grow right at the far end where it meets the field, no matter what I planted. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. The previous owners told me when I bought the place that there used to be a small cottage out in that field hundreds of years ago. It burned down with a family inside. They said sometimes, on cold nights, you can still smell the smoke. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to be skeptical, to find logical explanations. But after what I'd seen and now hearing Elaine confirm it, "Why do you stay connected to this place?" I asked her. "Why not sell it?" She looked away. "I've tried. 3 times I've had it on the market. Each time the sale falls through at the last minute. Different reasons every time, but always something. After the 3rd time, I took it as a sign. This place, it doesn't want to let go." I stayed in the annex for another 2 weeks after that conversation. I never went into the main house after dark again. During the day, I'd sometimes hear noises, footsteps, doors, once what sounded like a child's laugh. But I never saw the shadow again. What finally drove me out was something that happened my last night there. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the smell of smoke. Not strong, just a hint, like a distant bonfire. I checked the annex, checked my cooking appliances. Everything was fine. The smell seemed to be coming from outside. I looked out my window toward the field behind the house. There was nothing visible, no fire, no smoke, just darkness. But as I stood there, I swear I saw movement, a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the field, looking toward the house, looking at my window. I moved away immediately, heart pounding. When I gathered the courage to look again a few minutes later, there was nothing there, but the smell of smoke lingered until dawn. I moved out the next day, found a small flat in Inverness, much more expensive but worth every penny for my peace of mind. I've tried to rationalize what happened, tried to convince myself it was just an overactive imagination triggered by an old, creaky house and Elaine's stories. But I know what I saw. That small shadow darting across the hallway wasn't something I imagined. I still keep in touch with Elaine. The annex is empty again. She says she's not going to rent it out anymore. Last time we spoke, she told me she's been hearing the boy more often lately, running up and down the stairs, laughing, crying, and sometimes, when she looks out toward the field at night, she sees the tall man standing there, watching the house. Story 18. I've never really talked about this outside my family. Even now, 12 years later, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. But I need to get this out there, see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I grew up in Oakvale, one of those tiny towns where everyone knows everyone's business. Our house was this old 2-story place from the 1940s with wooden floors that announced every footstep and those weird little quirks old houses have. Doors that wouldn't quite close right, windows that rattled when it was windy. You know the type. My great-grandmother had passed away about 2 weeks before it happened. I was 16 at the time. She wasn't what you'd call a warm person. Don't get me wrong. I loved her because she was family. But she was stern, critical, and had this way of making you feel small with just a look. She'd lived with us on and off throughout my childhood before moving to a nursing home in her final years. It was a Tuesday evening in October. I remember because my mum worked late shifts at the hospital on Tuesdays, and she wouldn't be home until around 4 in the morning. It was just me, my two little brothers. They were 4 and 5 back then. My stepdad, our dog Max, a German Shepherd mix, and our cat Pepper in the house. We were all in the living room. My stepdad was watching some history documentary about World War II. I was helping my youngest brother with a puzzle on the floor while my other brother was coloring in a dinosaur book. Max was sleeping by the front door, his usual spot, and Pepper was curled up on the windowsill. It was completely normal, boring even. It was around 8:30 when it started. The first creak from the staircase barely registered. Old houses make noises, right? But then there was another creak, and another, in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind of sound that could only be made by someone putting weight on each step. My stepdad muted the TV. "Did you hear that?" he asked me. I nodded, already feeling a chill creep up my spine. We both knew nobody else was in the house. The creaking continued. Slow, methodical, like someone carefully making their way up the stairs. Then we heard something that made my blood run cold, the distinct sound of a hand sliding up the banister, the wood groaning under pressure. My stepdad stood up. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone there?" No response, just more creaking. I gathered my brothers closer to me on the couch. They were too young to understand what was happening, but they could sense the tension. "What's that noise?" my 5-year-old brother asked. "Just the house," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Old houses make noises sometimes, but it wasn't just the house. The footsteps continued, and now they had a distinctive pattern, slow and dragging, with a pause between each step. Exactly the way my great-grandmother used to climb those stairs, using the railing to pull herself up, pausing to catch her breath. My stepdad walked to the bottom of the staircase and looked up. I could see his face from the couch, watched as the color drained from it. "There's nobody there," he said, but his voice shook. The footsteps had reached the middle of the staircase when Max suddenly woke up. His ears perked, and he stared at the stairs. A low growl built in his throat, and then he started barking. Not his usual "someone's at the door" bark, but something more frantic, more afraid. That's when Pepper bolted from the windowsill and darted under the couch, pressing herself against the wall as far back as she could go. And then, as if things weren't terrifying enough, all 3 screen doors in our house, the front, back, and side door, began to open and slam shut. Bang, 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 over and over. There was no wind, no storm, nothing that could explain it. My brothers started crying. I wrapped my arms around them, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Make it stop," my 4-year-old brother screamed, burying his face against me. My stepdad ran to the front door first, trying to hold it closed, but it kept yanking itself from his grip. He checked outside. Nothing. No one was there. The night was completely still. The footsteps continued up the stairs, that horrible, familiar dragon pause. Max was going absolutely crazy now, barking and growling at something none of us could see. I stared at the top of the staircase, terrified of what might appear there. My brothers were both screaming and crying, clinging to me. I was crying too, but trying to be brave for them. "It's okay," I kept saying over and over, even though it was the furthest thing from okay. "It's okay, it's okay." My stepdad gave up on the doors and came back to us, pulling all 3 of us against him on the couch. He was trembling too. The footsteps reached the second-to-last step. The doors slammed harder, faster. Max's barking reached a frenzied pitch, and then the final step. Silence, complete and utter silence. The doors stopped. Max stopped barking and just stood there, hackles raised, staring at the top of the stairs. The footsteps stopped. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. That silence was somehow worse than all the noise. At least with the noise, we knew where it was. Now it could be anywhere, watching us. None of us moved. None of us spoke. We just sat there, huddled together on the couch, staring at the top of the staircase where the footsteps had ended. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. I lost track of time. My brothers eventually cried themselves to sleep against me, but I stayed awake, too terrified to close my eyes. My stepdad suggested we go upstairs to bed around 11. but I refused. There was no way I was going up those stairs. No way I was putting my brothers in their bedroom up there. He didn't push it. I think he was just as scared as I was. We stayed in the living room all night. My stepdad tried to make it seem like a fun sleepover, bringing down blankets from the downstairs closet, not from upstairs, and making pallets on the floor. But he kept looking toward the stairs, and I noticed he positioned himself between us and whatever might come down from up there. Max wouldn't leave the bottom of the staircase. He just sat there, alert, occasionally growling at nothing we could see. Pepper stayed under the couch until morning. When my mom finally got home around 4 in the morning, we were all still awake except for my brothers. She found us in the living room, pale and exhausted. "What happened?" she asked, looking at our faces. "Why are you all down here?" My stepdad and I told her everything. I expected her to dismiss it, to say we'd let our imaginations run wild. But she didn't. She just listened. And when we finished, she sat down heavily in the armchair. "It was her, wasn't it?" she said quietly. "It was my grandmother." Over breakfast, with daylight streaming through the windows making everything seem less frightening, we talked about it more. My mom revealed that my great-grandmother had always said she'd come back to check on us after she died. We'd thought it was just talk. For weeks after, I slept in my mom's room on the first floor. I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs alone. My brothers, despite being so young, remembered everything. Even now, 12 years later, they can describe that night in perfect detail. The sound of the footsteps, the banging doors, the way Max barked at the empty staircase. The weird thing is, the incident seemed to kickstart other strange happenings in our house. Lights would turn on and off. Things would move from where we left them. Cold spots would appear in rooms that were otherwise warm. My grandfather, my great-grandmother's son, came to visit about a month after the incident. He'd always been the biggest skeptic in our family, dismissing any talk of ghosts or the paranormal as nonsense. He stayed in the guest room upstairs. The morning after his first night, he came down to breakfast looking shaken. When my mom asked what was wrong, he hesitated before admitting he'd seen someone standing in the corner of his room in the middle of the night. A small, thin figure with white hair wearing his mother's favorite housecoat. "It was just standing there watching me," he said. "I know it sounds crazy, but it was her. It was Mom." Coming from him, the ultimate non-believer, it hit differently. If he was admitting to seeing something, it had to be real. We moved out of that house the following year. My mom said it was because we needed more space, but I know the real reason. None of us ever felt comfortable there again, always waiting for those footsteps to start up the stairs, for the doors to start slamming. I'm 28 now, with my own place in a different city, but I still get nervous around staircases in old houses. I still listen for that distinctive creak-pause-creak pattern, and sometimes when I'm half asleep, I swear I can hear someone slowly making their way upstairs that don't exist in my single-story apartment. I don't know what my great-grandmother wanted that night. Was she checking on us like she promised? Was she angry about something? Or was she just passing through on her way to wherever it is we go after this? All I know is that 3 people and 2 animals experienced something unexplainable that night, and it changed how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, boundaries that aren't as solid as we think. Sometimes I wonder if she's still there, in that old house, climbing those stairs night after night, checking on whoever lives there now. Story 19. I've been afraid to talk about this for most of my life, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm hoping someone out there has experienced something similar or knows what the hell is going on with me. Ever since I was little, there's been something that looks like me and sounds like me, but isn't me. I know how crazy that sounds, trust me. For years, I tried to convince myself it was just my family being confused, or people's imaginations playing tricks on them. But after what happened last month, I can't keep pretending anymore. The first time I remember hearing about it, I was about 6. My mom came into my room one morning, looking exhausted. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Honey, did you need something last night? You kept calling for me." I told her I slept through the night. She insisted she'd heard me calling, "Come here, Mommy," from upstairs multiple times. But when she checked my room, I was sound asleep. It freaked her out, but she eventually chalked it up to dreaming or hearing things. But it kept happening. My grandma moved in with us when I was 8, and within weeks, she was telling similar stories. She'd hear me calling her from different rooms in the house, but when she'd go looking, she'd find me quietly reading or watching TV somewhere else. My mom would get this weird look on her face whenever Grandma mentioned these incidents, but they never really talked about it in front of me. I remember one specific afternoon when I was around 10, I was sitting on the living room floor playing a board game by myself. My grandma came rushing in from the kitchen looking confused. "Rebecca, but how did you—" "I just heard you upstairs asking if I could help you find something." "I've been down here the whole time, Grandma," I said. She stood there for a moment, then smiled weakly and said, "My old ears must be playing tricks on me." But I could see she was genuinely disturbed. As I got older, the incidents seemed to happen less frequently, or maybe my family just stopped mentioning them. I started to forget about it until high school when something happened that I couldn't ignore. My best friend Trey and I were hanging out at my house one Friday night when my parents were out of town. We were watching horror movies in the basement, ironically enough, and I must have fallen asleep on the couch. I woke up to find Trey shaking me, his face white as a sheet. "Rebecca, what the fuck?" he kept saying. "How did you do that?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He was genuinely freaked out. "You were just upstairs," he insisted. "I saw you at the top of the basement stairs. You were smiling at me in this weird way and you said, 'Come here, Trey,' and then disappeared around the corner. But you've been here the whole time." I tried to convince him he was seeing things because of the scary movies, but he wouldn't let it go. Trey was the most skeptical person I knew. He didn't believe in anything supernatural and always had logical explanations for everything. Seeing him that scared, it rattled me. After that night, Trey always made excuses not to hang out in my basement. We never really talked about what happened, but our friendship was never quite the same. He'd get uncomfortable whenever we were alone at my house. I went to college and tried to forget about all of it. I convinced myself it was just weird coincidences or people's imaginations. I didn't experience anything strange for a few years, and I started to believe maybe it was over, whatever it was. Then, last year, I moved in with my friend Jake. We weren't dating, just roommates sharing an apartment to save on rent. Everything was normal for the first few months. Then one night, we were visiting his parents' house about an hour away from our apartment. His mom was out of town, so we had the place to ourselves. We were hanging out in his old bedroom in the basement, watching a movie. Jake realized he'd left his phone in his car and went to grab it. I stayed in the bedroom, scrolling through social media. When he came back about 5 minutes later, he had this weird look on his face. "How did you get back down here so fast?" he asked. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? I never left." He laughed, but it was forced. "Quit messing with me. I just saw you upstairs." I felt cold all over. "Jake, I swear I've been here the whole time." "No way. I literally just saw you peeking through the garage door window at me. You were wearing exactly what you have on now." He gestured to my outfit, jeans and a gray hoodie. "You kept popping your head back and forth like you were going to jump out and scare me. I called your name, but you disappeared. I thought you were playing a prank." I felt sick. I showed him my phone, proving I'd been active on Instagram continuously for the past 10 minutes. There was no way I could have been upstairs. Jake tried to laugh it off, but I could tell he was disturbed. He kept glancing at me throughout the night, like he was trying to figure something out. We didn't talk about it again, but I caught him looking at me differently after that. Then, about a month ago, it happened again with Jake. This time it was worse. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I had a huge presentation at work the next day, and I was stressed about it. I went to bed early, around 9 o'clock. I took a sleeping pill because my anxiety was through the roof, and I was out cold within 20 minutes. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to Jake shaking me. He had turned on my bedroom light and was standing over my bed looking absolutely terrified. His face was pale and he was trembling. "What the fuck is going on?" he demanded. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" I was groggy from the sleeping pill and completely disoriented. "What? I'm sleeping. What time is it?" "It's 3 in the morning, he said. "You were just in my room. You were standing at the foot of my bed staring at me. I woke up and you were just standing there, not moving, not saying anything." I felt ice in my veins. "That's impossible. I took a sleeping pill. I've been asleep for hours." "Then who the fuck was in my room?" His voice cracked. "Because it looked exactly like you. Same pajamas and everything." I looked down at what I was wearing. Plaid pajama pants and an old university t-shirt. Did it say anything?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. Jake shook his head. "No, it just stared. Then when I sat up and said your name, it backed out of the room. I followed it, but there was nobody in the hallway. I came straight here and found you asleep." We sat in silence for a while. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I told him about the other incidents. My mom, my grandma, Trey, and the time at his parents' house. He listened without interrupting, his face getting paler by the minute. "I'm not crazy," I told him. "And you're not seeing things. Something that looks like me has been following me my whole life." The next day, Jake told me he was going to stay with a friend for a while. He moved out completely 2 weeks later. I don't blame him. Since then, I've been researching doppelgangers, mimics, anything that could explain what's happening. I've found stories about entities that can take human form, but nothing exactly like what I'm experiencing. The worst part is, I've never seen it myself. I've never encountered my own double. It only shows itself to people close to me, and only when I'm nearby but not in the same room. Last week I set up cameras all over my apartment. I have one in my bedroom, one in the living room, one in the hallway. I'm desperate to catch this thing on video, to prove I'm not losing my mind. So far nothing has shown up. I'm writing this because last night something new happened. I was in the shower when my phone rang. I ignored it, finished my shower and checked my messages. It was my mom. Her voicemail was shaky and confused. "Rebecca, you just called me, but the connection was bad. You were whispering something I couldn't understand. Are you okay? Call me back." I checked my call history. There was no outgoing call to my mom. Nothing. I called her back immediately and asked what time I supposedly called her. It was exactly when I was in the shower. My phone was on the counter in my bedroom. I couldn't have called her, but something using my phone number did. It's escalating. Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder. It's not just mimicking my appearance and voice anymore. Now it's using technology to reach people. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to sleep. I'm afraid to shower. I'm afraid to be alone in my apartment, but I'm also afraid to be around other people in case they see me when I'm not actually there. What happens when this thing decides to do more than just appear to people? What if it starts interacting more, saying things, doing things that I get blamed for? What if it hurts someone? I'm writing this in my living room right now. All my cameras are on. My doors are locked. I've called in sick to work 3 days in a row because I'm too scared to leave my apartment. I just heard a noise from my bedroom. The camera feed shows nothing there, but I know better now. It's here with me. It's always been here, and I think it knows I'm trying to expose it. If anyone has experienced anything similar or knows what this could be, please help me. I'm desperate. I don't know how much longer I can live like this, jumping at shadows and wondering if the people in my life are seeing me when I'm not actually there. What does it want? Why has it attached itself to me? And most terrifying of all, what happens when it decides it doesn't need the real Rebecca anymore? Story 20. I still get chills thinking about this, and it's been 4 years now. I've tried to explain it away countless times, but I can't. What happened that night in my sister's house still haunts me, and I need to share it somewhere, because keeping it bottled up is driving me crazy. This happened back in 2019, when my older sister Jess had just bought her first house in our college town. It was this cute two-story place in an older neighborhood near campus. Nothing fancy, but it was a huge deal for her. She'd been saving for years and was so proud to finally be a homeowner. The place needed some work, but it had character, you know? Wooden floors that creaked, an old brick fireplace, and these built-in bookshelves that she immediately fell in love with. Jess asked me to help her move in and paint some rooms that weekend. I was in my junior year at the university, so I lived in the dorms, but I jumped at the chance to spend time with her and get away from campus for a night. I invited my friend Hannah to come along. We'd been close since freshman year, and she was always up for anything. Plus, she was way better at picking colors than I was. We spent that Saturday painting my sister's living room this soft sage green color. By evening, we were exhausted and covered in paint. My sister ordered pizza, and we crashed in her living room watching Netflix until she headed off to bed around 11. She had to work early the next morning and left Hannah and me to take the guest room for the night. The guest room was at the back of the house, perfectly square with off-white walls and hardwood floors. There was a single bed with a trundle bed underneath that pulled out, you know, those beds that slide out from under another bed. The room had one window with these sheer tulle curtains that Jess had hung up temporarily until she could get proper blinds. The window faced the driveway and let in a lot of moonlight that night. I took the single bed since it was my sister's place, and Hannah got the trundle bed below. We stayed up talking for a while, just silly stuff about classes and people we knew. Eventually, we both dozed off around 1 in the morning. I've always been a light sleeper. The slightest noise or change in light can wake me up. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first stirred, but something pulled me from sleep. That feeling you get when you're not alone, that weird sixth sense that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. That's what I felt. At first, I thought maybe Hannah had gotten up to use the bathroom. I was still groggy, my eyes adjusting to the dark. The moon was bright that night, filtering through those thin curtains and casting this silvery light across the room. As my vision cleared, I noticed a figure standing by the window. It looked like Hannah, same height, same build, same shoulder-length dark hair. She was just standing there, completely still, staring out the window. Her back was to me, and she was wearing the same oversized t-shirt Hannah had gone to sleep in. "Hannah," I whispered, propping myself up on my elbow. "What are you doing?" The figure didn't move at first. Then, without turning around, it made this sound, hoo-hoo. Just like that, flat and emotionless. It wasn't a laugh or an attempt at an owl sound. It was just strange. A low, feminine voice saying hoo-hoo, with no inflection whatsoever. I thought maybe she was half asleep or messing with me. "Hannah, seriously, what are you looking at?" I asked again, a little louder this time. Again, without turning. "Hoo-hoo." Something felt very wrong. The way she was standing was too rigid, too still. Nobody stands that still, and that weird response, it made my skin crawl. I've known Hannah for years, and she'd never done anything like this before. That's when I glanced down at the trundle bed next to me, more out of instinct than anything else. Hannah was there, sleeping, curled up on her side with her back to me, breathing steadily. My blood turned to ice. I looked back at the figure by the window, then down at Hannah again. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. How could Hannah be in two places at once? Before I could even form another thought, the figure at the window snapped its head toward me. Not a normal turn. It was too fast, too mechanical. 1 second it was facing the window, and the next, its face was turned over its shoulder at an angle that seemed impossible, staring directly at me. In the moonlight, I could see its face clearly. It looked exactly like Hannah. Same features, same everything, except the eyes. They were Hannah's eyes in shape and color, but completely empty, cold, like looking at a photograph of eyes rather than real ones. There was nothing behind them, no light, no life, no Hannah. I screamed. I actually screamed and threw myself against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. The real Hannah jolted awake below me, confused and startled. "What? What's happening?" she mumbled, sitting up in the trundle bed. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure by the window, but in the split second I glanced down at the real Hana and back up again. It was gone. Just gone. Not like it had walked away or ducked down. It had simply vanished. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was shaking uncontrollably. Hana climbed up onto my bed, grabbing my arm, asking what was wrong. I could barely speak. I just pointed at the window and managed to stammer out, "You were standing there." Hana looked at the window, then back at me like I was crazy. "I was asleep, Vanessa. I haven't moved." "No, I know you were asleep, but something that looked exactly like you was standing there, staring out the window." My voice was trembling. When I asked what it was doing, it just said, "Hoo-hoo," in this weird voice. Then it turned its head and looked at me. I checked my phone. It was 2:40 in the morning. The room felt so cold suddenly, even though it was a warm May night. Hana, bless her, didn't dismiss me outright. She looked freaked out but tried to calm me down. "Maybe you were dreaming or sleep paralysis." It wasn't sleep paralysis. I moved, I sat up, I spoke to it, and it wasn't a dream. I'm wide awake. I was still pressed against the wall, afraid to move. "It looked exactly like you, Hana." Exactly. But the eyes were wrong. I got out of bed on shaky legs and demonstrated what I'd seen. How the figure had been standing. How unnaturally it had turned its head. Hana's face went pale. We both checked around the room, looked under the bed, opened the closet. Nothing. We even went into the hallway and checked the bathroom. The house was silent except for the distant sound of my sister's white noise machine. We went back to the guest room and I immediately closed the curtains all the way, even though they were sheer and didn't block much. Somehow having them closed made me feel marginally better. We sat on my bed with the lights on, trying to make sense of what had happened. "Could someone have broken in?" Hana suggested. But we both knew that made no sense. How would an intruder look exactly like her, and where would they have gone? "Maybe the house is haunted," she offered next. But that didn't feel right either. The house wasn't that old, and my sister hadn't mentioned anything strange. We stayed up for another hour, both too freaked out to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we decided to both sleep on the single bed, squished together with the lights on. I don't think either of us really slept, just dozed fitfully until morning came. When we told my sister at breakfast, she looked concerned, but suggested I might have had a hypnagogic hallucination, those weird half-dream states that happen when you're falling asleep or waking up. I wanted to believe that, but it didn't explain why it felt so real, why I was fully conscious and able to move, or why the experience was so specific and detailed. Hana and I didn't talk much on the drive back to campus. I could tell she was spooked, and honestly, I think she half believed I'd had some kind of mental break. We never stayed at my sister's house together again, and whenever I bring it up now, Hana changes the subject. I think the idea that something could impersonate her so perfectly terrifies her more than she wants to admit. I've spent 4 years trying to explain what I saw that night. Was it a ghost, a doppelganger, some weird entity that can mimic people? Sleep paralysis doesn't fit because I could move freely. A dream doesn't make sense because I was absolutely awake. Hallucination? Maybe, but I've never hallucinated before or since. What haunts me most are those eyes. They were Hana's eyes in every physical detail. Same color, same shape, but completely hollow, like something wearing a Hana costume, but not quite getting it right. And that strange hoo-hoo response. I can still hear it in my head sometimes. I sleep with my curtains closed now, no matter where I am. I can't stand the thought of looking up and seeing someone, or something, staring in at me, or worse, seeing someone I know standing there when they shouldn't be. I don't know what was in that room with us that night. All I know is that for a few terrifying minutes, I saw my friend in 2 places at once, and whatever was standing by that window wasn't human. It might have looked like Hana, But whatever was behind those empty eyes was something else entirely. Story 21. I still can't sleep without checking my mirrors first. It's been 3 months since that night at the old Pineview Hotel, and I'm writing this because I need someone to believe me. My therapist thinks it's just trauma, but she wasn't there. She didn't see what we saw. It was supposed to be a simple urbex trip. Just me, Lucas, my buddy Zeke, and our friend Mari. We'd explored abandoned places before, old factories, a shuttered hospital once, but nothing prepared us for Pineview. The hotel sits about 20 minutes outside our small town, right off Highway 16, where nobody drives anymore since they built the interstate. It's this massive 4-story brick building that's been abandoned since the early 2000s. Local legend says the owner went bankrupt after a guest died in one of the rooms, but nobody really knows for sure. We parked Zeke's Jeep in the overgrown lot around 4 in the afternoon. The place looked smaller from outside than I remembered, just another dead business slowly being reclaimed by nature. The front doors were busted open, hanging off their hinges like broken arms. No need for breaking and entering when someone had already done the breaking part. "Looks like we're not the first ones here," Mari said, pulling her jacket tighter around herself even though it wasn't that cold. "The lobby hit us with this smell I'll never forget, like old perfume mixed with mold and something else I couldn't place. The carpet squished under our feet, still damp from God knows what. The reception desk was there, papers scattered everywhere, and this massive chandelier hung overhead, most of its crystals missing or shattered on the floor. "Let's split up," Zeke suggested, already pointing his flashlight beam down a hallway. "Cover more ground, meet back here in an hour." That was our first mistake. I took the east wing, Mari went upstairs, and Zeke headed toward what looked like a ballroom. The hallways were wrong. I can't explain it better than that. They curved in ways that didn't make sense for the building's exterior. I kept having to use my phone flashlight because the windows were either boarded up or so caked with grime they barely let any light through. I found what must have been the restaurant area. Tables were still set with moldy tablecloths and rusted silverware. Some plates even had food remnants, like everyone just got up and left mid-meal. There was this one table in the corner that had a full place setting, fork, knife, napkin folded perfectly, like it was waiting for someone to arrive. The chair was pulled out slightly, facing the door. What really freaked me out was finding a room service menu dated 2 months ago. Not years, months. But the hotel had been closed for over 15 years. I checked my phone, 5:30. I'd been wandering for over an hour without realizing it. No texts from the others, no signal either. That's when I noticed the first really weird thing. The hallway I'd come through now ended in a wall, a solid wall with yellowed wallpaper matching the rest of the corridor. I backtracked, thinking I'd gotten turned around, but I hadn't. The hallway that should have led back to the lobby just ended. I tried calling out for Zeke and Mari, but my voice seemed to get swallowed up by the walls. That's when I heard Zeke shouting from somewhere below me. I followed the sound down a staircase I didn't remember seeing before. I found him in what must have been the ballroom, massive space, wooden floor warped from water damage, shattered mirrors lining one wall like someone had systematically punched each one. Chairs and tables were overturned everywhere, like there had been a fight or maybe a panic. "Dude, check this out," Zeke said, pointing to the center of the room. There sat a wheelchair, just sitting there facing the wall, no tracks around it in the dust, like it had been placed there and never moved. The weird part? The dust covered everything except a perfect circle around the chair, like someone had carefully cleaned just that spot. "Where's Mari?" I asked. "Thought she was with you," he said, still staring at that wheelchair. "We tried texting her but got no response. Our phones showed 6:30 now. We'd been there over 2 hours, and the light outside was fading fast. We found Mari on the 3rd floor, in a hallway lined with suites. She was standing in one of the rooms, looking confused. "Guys, this doesn't make sense," she said when we walked in. "Look." The room was clean, Not just tidy, but actually clean. The bed was made with fresh-looking sheets. There were modern water bottles on the nightstand, not old ones, current brands with the newer labels. The bathroom had fresh towels. "Someone's been staying here," I said. "That's not all." Mari pointed to the desk. "Look at the date on that newspaper. It was from last week. We all agreed it was time to leave." The sun was setting, and none of us wanted to be there after dark. We headed for what we thought was the direction of the lobby, but after 15 minutes of walking, we somehow ended up in a wing we hadn't seen before. "This is impossible," Zeke muttered, checking his phone compass, which was spinning wildly. "The building isn't this big from the outside." That's when we realized we couldn't find the exit. Every turn led us deeper into the hotel. Staircases would go up one floor, then loop back to where we started. We'd open a door thinking it led outside, only to find a closet filled with identical pairs of shoes, all pointed toward the wall. By 7:30, the sun was gone, and we were using our phone flashlights to navigate. That's when I saw it. The face. I was checking a cracked mirror near what seemed to be an old elevator shaft, sweeping my light across it to look for exit signs, when I caught a reflection that wasn't mine. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with a pale face and a stretched grin that went almost ear to ear. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, the face was still there, still grinning, now slightly closer. I didn't tell the others. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the stress getting to me, but I kept seeing it in reflective surfaces, windows, metal doors, puddles on the floor, always watching, always grinning. Around 8, Mari screamed. We rushed to her and found her backing away from a utility closet. Inside were porcelain dolls, hundreds of them, stacked from floor to ceiling. Every single one had its eyes gouged out, leaving dark, empty sockets. As we passed, I swear I saw some of them twitch. "We need to find somewhere to wait until morning," Zeke said, his voice shaking. "I don't think we're getting out of here tonight. We found the kitchen around 9:30 and barricaded ourselves inside. It seemed safer somehow. Concrete floors instead of that awful carpet, metal counters, fewer shadows for things to hide in. We tried to keep each other calm, sharing the snacks we'd brought, trying to make sense of what was happening. Throughout the night we heard things, doors closing in the distance, always in pairs like footsteps, whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor above us. The old industrial refrigerator in the corner had something scratched into its metal door. "Don't forget you're already here." None of us slept. We just sat there, backs against the wall, jumping at every sound. Mari cried silently for hours. Zeke kept getting up to check the barricade we'd made with tables against the door. Around 3 in the morning, the lights came on. Not all of them, just one bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging slightly, though there was no breeze. It flickered and went out after about 10 seconds. "Did you see that?" Mari whispered, pointing to the pantry door. I hadn't seen anything, but Zeke nodded. Something moved in there. We stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The pantry door slowly creaked open about an inch, then stopped. Zeke's phone buzzed. We all nearly jumped out of our skin. He looked at it, confused. "I have signal," he said. 1 bar. He tried calling 911, but it wouldn't connect. Then he got a text from Marie. But Mari was sitting right next to us, her phone dead since midnight. The text just said, "Look up." We didn't. We couldn't. When the first light of dawn finally came through a small window near the ceiling, we felt a collective relief wash over us. Whatever had been happening seemed to retreat with the darkness. We moved the tables and stepped out into the hallway, expecting to have to find our way through the maze again. But there, just 15 feet from where we'd been hiding all night, was a plastic curtain we'd somehow missed. It led directly outside. We ran to Zeke's Jeep without looking back. None of us spoke on the drive home. Here's the thing that still haunts me. When we looked up news about the hotel later, we found nothing unusual. No deaths, no bankruptcies. The owner apparently just closed it down because of poor business. But when we checked our phones, all the photos we'd taken inside were corrupted. Just black screens with occasional smears of white, except for one. Mari had taken a group selfie of us when we first arrived. In the background, clearly visible through the lobby windows, you can see Zeke's Jeep. Parked next to it is an identical Jeep that wasn't there when we arrived. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still see that grinning face standing behind me. Only now, it's wearing my clothes. Story 22. I've been debating whether to share this for years. I'm still not sure if writing it down will help or just drag me back into that darkness. But here goes. Back in early 2011, I met Steve at a New Year's Eve party. It was one of those random meetings. He accidentally spilled beer on my favorite boots while we were dancing. I remember being annoyed at first, but he was so genuinely apologetic and cute that I couldn't stay mad. We exchanged numbers, and within a week we were dating. Things moved pretty fast between us. He was charming, attentive, and we just clicked. Within a couple months, I was staying over at his place a few nights a week. His apartment was in Lake Worth, nothing fancy, just a small unit in what used to be a duplex that had been converted into 4 separate apartments for singles. It was cozy enough, and I liked how close it was to my school. I didn't notice anything strange at first, just normal new relationship stuff, getting to know each other, figuring out routines, all that. But around 3 months in, I started having these dreams. Not just dreams. Night terrors. I used to have night terrors as a kid, but I'd mostly outgrown them by my teens. They'd only come back during really stressful periods, like during finals week or when my parents were going through their divorce. But my life was actually pretty great at this point. School was going well. I loved my part-time job at the coffee shop, and things with Steve were better than any relationship I'd had before. So when the terrors started, I couldn't figure out why. The first one happened after I'd been staying over regularly for about a month. I woke up gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I couldn't remember what I'd dreamed, just fragments, red, so much red, and a feeling of being trapped. Steve woke up and held me until I calmed down, but I couldn't shake this horrible feeling all day. I brushed it off as a one-time thing, but then it happened again the next week, and the week after that. Soon it was happening almost every time I stayed over. The dreams got more vivid. I'd see flashes of violence, not like movie violence, but something raw and real. Blood spattering across walls, a hand gripping hair so tight that clumps came out at the roots. The worst part was this feeling that came with the dreams, like I was both the victim and a helpless witness. I'd wake up feeling violated, like something had been taken from me. Steve was supportive but confused. He suggested I was stressed about school and just not admitting it to myself. Maybe he was right, I thought, but deep down, I knew this was different. These feelings only came when I was at his place. One morning in May, after a particularly bad night, I decided to try meditating to calm myself. Steve had already left for work, and I had a late start that day. I sat on the edge of the bed, closed my eyes, and tried to focus on my breathing. That's when I saw him. Not with my eyes, they were closed, but in my mind, clear as day. A man sitting at the foot of the bed, head in his hands. He had these sad blue eyes, but not sad like he was hurting. Sad like he knew he'd done something terrible and couldn't take it back. His presence felt heavy, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I knew without being told that this man had done horrible things in this very place. I opened my eyes with a gasp, but no one was there. Just me, alone in Steve's apartment, shaking. I tried to go about my day. I had classes, assignments due, normal life stuff, but I couldn't concentrate. That face kept appearing in my mind, those eyes. During my afternoon break, I found myself in the library, opening a computer browser. My fingers moved almost on their own as I typed, "Rape, Murder, Lake Worth apartment." I didn't even know Steve's exact address at that point. I'd never gotten mail there or had to give anyone directions. I just knew the general area and what the building looked like. The first search result made my blood turn to ice. It was a news article from a local paper, recently published because of new developments in a cold case. In 1987, a waitress had been attacked outside her home. dragged inside by her hair, sexually assaulted and murdered. Neighbors heard screams but didn't call police, thinking it was just a domestic dispute. Her body wasn't found for 3 days. The article mentioned that the perpetrator had recently confessed to the crime after over 20 years. He'd been in prison for another offense and finally admitted to this one too, giving details that only the killer could have known. The address listed in the article was familiar. I'd seen it on Steve's mail. With shaking hands, I pulled up my phone and texted him, trying to sound casual. "Hey, what's your full address again? Need to have something delivered." When his reply came through and matched the address in the article, I felt sick. But what made me truly lose it was the mugshot included in the article. It was him, the blue-eyed man from my vision. Same sad eyes, same heavy brow, same thin lips. I recognized him instantly, even though I'd never seen him before in my life. I didn't go back to Steve's that night. I made up an excuse about a group project. I needed time to process what I'd found. Was I going crazy? How could I have seen the face of a murderer I knew nothing about? I spent hours researching the case. The victim's name was Catherine. She was 28, worked at a local diner, and lived alone. The attack happened in what was now Steve's bedroom. According to the confession, her attacker had been watching her for weeks, learning her schedule. He waited until she came home from a late shift, forced his way in when she was unlocking her door, and then, I couldn't read the details. It was too much. But I knew. That's what my nightmares had been showing me. Somehow, I was connecting with what had happened there all those years ago. When I finally went back to Steve's 2 days later, I couldn't even look at the bedroom. I told him I wasn't feeling well and stayed on the couch. He was worried about me, kept asking what was wrong. How could I tell him? "Oh, by the way, your apartment is where a woman was brutally murdered, and I'm having psychic visions about it." He'd think I was losing my mind. I tried sage smudging when he wasn't around. I tried prayer. I tried silently acknowledging what had happened there, hoping that would somehow bring peace. Nothing worked. The nightmares continued, sometimes getting even worse. One night, about a week after my discovery, I woke up around 3 in the morning. Steve was sound asleep beside me, but I was wide awake, heart racing from another nightmare. As I lay there trying to calm down, I felt the mattress depress slightly at the foot of the bed, like someone had sat down. I froze, afraid to look. The room was dark except for the dim glow of a streetlight through the blinds. Slowly, I raised my head just enough to see the end of the bed. There was a woman sitting there, not solid, not transparent either, just there. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the wall, her back partially turned. I could see dark stains on her clothes, her hair tangled and matted on one side. She didn't move or acknowledge me, but I felt her anguish filling the room like a physical thing. I must have made some sound because Steve stirred. When I looked back after he settled, she was gone. But the feeling remained, this profound grief and anger. I finally told Steve the next day. Not about seeing the woman, but about the history of the apartment. He was shocked, said the landlord never mentioned anything. He seemed disturbed, but also skeptical about my nightmares being connected. "It's horrible what happened," he said, "but that was decades ago." But it wasn't decades ago for me. It was happening every night in my dreams. It was happening every time I felt watched in the bathroom or felt cold spots in the living room. It was happening when I'd hear what sounded like sobbing coming from the closet, only to find nothing there. I started staying at my own place more often, Steve noticed, and it created tension between us. How could I explain that I wasn't pulling away from him but from his apartment, from the energy that clung to those walls? The breaking point came in July. I'd stayed over after we went to a concert, too tired to drive home. That night I dreamed I was Catherine, not watching her. I was her. I felt the hand grab my hair, felt myself being dragged across the floor, felt the weight on my chest as I struggled to breathe. I felt everything. I woke up screaming, truly screaming, with Steve trying desperately to calm me down. I was hyperventilating, clawing at my neck where I'd felt hands in the dream. "I can't do this anymore. I told him once I could speak. I can't stay here. We broke up 2 weeks later. It wasn't just about the apartment. The strain had affected everything between us. He thought I was being irrational, maybe even using the apartment's history as an excuse to end things. I couldn't make him understand what I was experiencing. Before I left for the last time, I stood alone in the bedroom and spoke to Catherine if she was there. I told her I was sorry for what happened to her, that her suffering had been acknowledged now, that her killer had confessed, that she could rest. I don't know if she heard me. I don't know if any of it was real, or if my mind somehow created these experiences after learning about the murder. All I know is that I've never felt anything like that before or since. It's been years now. I heard Steve moved out about 6 months after we broke up. Sometimes I wonder if he started experiencing things too, or if he just couldn't stand being there after what I'd told him. I still think about Catherine sometimes. I hope she's found peace. As for me, I'm still trying to understand what happened, how I could see a man's face before knowing he existed, how I could feel a woman's terror from decades earlier. Some things just can't be explained, I guess. But I know what I felt in that apartment, and I know I'll never set foot in a place like that again.